whispers in the walls, footprints in the snow. First came the whisper soft, coaxing, threading through air vents after midnight. Then the footprints appeared beneath Theo's bedroom window, adult, sized, deliberate, stopping inches from the sill before vanishing into the pines. Each discovery tightened the vice on Walter Granger's nerves until his PTSD nightmares felt kinder than daylight. But it was Barron's sudden feral roar that shattered their fragile denial and launched an investigation neither the sheriff nor the FBI could have predicted. What lurked behind those walls? Why were maintenance records forged for every house with a child under 10? And how did the town's most unassuming pet become the last line between safety and unthinkable loss? Follow the trail of clues, paw prints, and human courage to the moment moonlight meets locked closet door and fear finally stands down. The pines whispered like old soldiers holding secrets in the snow. At the farthest edge of Redwood Hollowware, the town's last street lamp gave up, and the forest took overstood a weather-worn cabin, crouched beneath a blanket of white. Smoke curled lazily from the stone chimney, and snow piled high along the wooden porch rail, untouched except for the large paw prints leading to the front door. Inside, time moved slower. The walls were lined with old books and faded photographs, most of them black and white soldiers in fatigues, grinning in youth now long gone. A rusted canteen hung by the fireplace, next to a folded flag in a shadow box. Everything in the cabin spoke of a man who had seen war, who had buried friends, and who had walked away from it all with nothing but a quiet ache he never spoke of. Walter Granger stood at the window, mug in hand, watching the tree line. His face was carved by the years' deep-set lines around his mouth, crow's feet tugging at pale blue eyes that rarely blinked. The kind of eyes that had stared through rifle scopes and dust clouds, and now found comfort only in stillness. He wore an old flannel shirt and a pair of thick wool socks. The only sound in the room was the soft thud of a tail against the floorboard's thump, thump, thumpus Baron, the retired K9 German Shepherd, stretched by the hearth. The dog's fur was peppered with gray now, and the old harness he used to wear in the force hung on the coat rack like a memory too heavy to throw away. Baron was never far from Theo. The boy, just 7, had hair the color of burnt autumn leaves and a gaze that felt older than it should. He sat cross-legged in the corner, building a crooked Lego castle on the braided rug. Occasionally, he would glance at the fireplace or at Baron, as if measuring the distance to safety. His parents had died 3 winters ago in a highway collision, and since then, silence had become his native language. Walter had buried his own son that year. Theo's father, and with that, buried the last of his hope for peace. Yet something about this cabin, this wintered edge of the world, felt like a place where wounds could scab over. They had routines here. Theo fed the birds every morning. Baron waited for the school bus every afternoon even, though Walter taught him from home, and every Sunday. They carved a notch into the oak post outside the front door, marking time not in months, but in small moments survived together. Outside, the forest seemed endless. The trees stood tall, thick, and ancient, their branches sagging under the weight of fresh snow. Wind moved through them with the hush of breath on a dying flame. Coyotes howled at night. Owls kept watch, and sometimes, if you were still enough, you could hear the crack of a branch under something larger than you hoped was there. But in that moment, with the fire casting shadows on the log walls and Baron resting like a sentry beside Theo, the cabin felt impenetrable. Walter watched the sky darken as twilight sank behind the hills. He sipped his coffee, strong and black, and reached for the switch to turn on the porch light. The bulb buzzed, then flickered to life, casting a dim orange halo across the snowdrifts. A few deer tracks curved around the edge of the woods, vanishing into the trees. He glanced back at Theo, who was now half asleep with his head resting against Baron's flank. The dog didn't move, just flicked an ear as if to say, "I've got him." Walter's throat tightened not from emotion exactly, but from the kind of gratitude that doesn't ask to be spoken. He walked over, knelt down, and gently tugged a blanket from the couch to drape over them. Baron stirred just enough to nuzzle Theo's cheek, and Theo mumbled in his sleep, "Stay." Walter's hand paused midair. He looked at the boy so small, so breakable, and then at the dog who had once taken down armed suspects without hesitation, now lying still as stone just to be a pillow for a child who had lost everything. "Good boy," Walter whispered. Outside, Snow began to fall again, thick and soft. Each flake landed like a secret on the roof. The cold crept up the walls, but inside, the fire held strong. On the mantel above it, a photo frame stood slightly crooked, a young Walter in uniform, holding a German shepherd not unlike Baron, back when the world made a different kind of sense. Theo stirred in his sleep again, and Baron let out a soft whine. Walter leaned down, touched the dog's ear, and whispered, "Still watching the perimeter, huh?" Baron blinked. No bark, no growl. But Walter understood. The dog had never stopped being on duty, not even in retirement. The cabin may have looked quiet, but quiet didn't mean safe, and Baron knew it. As night fell deeper over Redwood Hollow, Walter dimmed the lights and stepped outside onto the porch. He lit a cigarette, even though he promised Theo he'd quit, and stared out into the trees. The forest loomed, tall and black. Snowflakes spiraled in the porch light, like ashes. Somewhere, deep within that darkness, something shifted. A branch snapped not loudly, but enough. Baron lifted his head inside the cabin. Walter exhaled slowly, the smoke curling into the cold, and narrowed his eyes toward the woods. Nothing moved. Just the trees, just the wind. Still, he flicked the butt of the cigarette into the snow and went back inside, locking the door behind him. He didn't believe in ghosts, but he believed in instinct sand tonight. They scratched at the edge of his thoughts like cold fingers tapping glass. Baron was now standing, his body between Theo and the door. Walter reached down, ran a calloused hand along the shepherd's spine, and whispered, "We'll keep watch together." And the snow kept falling. Mornings in Redwood Hollow always began with silence, the kind of thick, snowy silence that blanketed sound before it ever had a chance to speak. The sun filtered through the trees in narrow shafts of gold, catching the frost on the porch rails like glitter on old wood. The cabin stirred slowly, like it had learned to breathe in rhythm with the forest around it. Baron was always the first to rise. Long before Walter's coffee kettle hissed or Theo shuffled sleepily from bed, Baron would be stationed by the front door, ears alert, posture still, not guarding with tension, but watching. Always watching. His breath fogged the window panes as he scanned the tree line, then the driveway, then the mailbox that hadn't seen a letter in weeks. By the time Theo had brushed his teeth and fumbled into a wool sweater 3 sizes too big, Baron was already by the front gate, his spot, the same one he had picked since the first morning they'd moved in. His eyes would fix on the bend in the snowy road, waiting for the yellow blur of the school bus through the trees. It wasn't that Theo rode the bus. Walter had kept him home, homeschooled him from worn textbooks and memories, but Baron didn't know that. Or maybe he did. Maybe the routine wasn't about waiting for a bus at all. Maybe it was about presence, assurance, the ritual of readiness. "Still waiting, huh?" Walter would mutter, stepping onto the porch with a tin cup of black coffee steaming in his hand. Baron wouldn't look back, but his tail would give one slow thud against the snow-dusted earth. Theo would come next, tiptoeing down the creaky steps and leaning into the dog's side. No words, no hurry, just a boy pressing warmth into something that made him feel safe. Baron allowed it every time. If Walter had tried that back in Baron's working days, he might have lost a wrist. They had their rhythms now, each one like stitches in a quilt that kept the cold out. Walter tended the woodpile, chopped logs with slow, deliberate swings that echoed through the trees. Theo built miniature towns in the snow with twigs and bottle caps, narrating battles under his breath when he thought no one was listening. And Baron moved between them, both, always circling, always calculating. It wasn't obvious at first. To anyone else, Baron looked like a retired dog, living out the last of his days in a cabin nestled among pines. But Walter saw it. The way his ears twitched at every sound that didn't belong. The way he sniffed the window frames every night, not out of curiosity, but like a sentry marking weakness in the walls. There was one moment that always struck Walter. When a hiker or lost traveler passed along the snow trail bordering the woods. The cabin wasn't on any tourist map, but occasionally, someone wandered too close. The first sign was silence. Then Baron would rise as slowly, like a coiled spring-in position himself between Theo and the nearest entrance. He never barked, never lunged. He just stood there, eyes narrowed, hackles barely lifted, waiting, measuring, as if deciding whether this stranger was shadow or threat. One afternoon, A man in an orange parka had stopped by the trail to check his compass. Barron had stood rigid at the window, breath fogging the glass, until the man disappeared into the tree line. Walter didn't need to say a word. The dog returned to his rug by the fire, but his gaze didn't soften until well past dusk. Still wired for war, Walter murmured to himself that night, petting the dog's head. Some things never turn off. Storms were the only time Theo showed fear. Not the tantrum kind, but something deeper primal. The kind that lives in the spine and refuses to move. Whenever thunder rolled over the hills and the trees groaned beneath the wind, Theo would vanish. Not out the door, not under the bed, but into the hallway closet. He called it his ship. He said it floated on a quiet ocean where lightning couldn't reach. Walter never questioned it. He just placed a flashlight by the closet door, slid a thermos of warm cocoa beside it, and sat nearby with a book and Barron. Barron never left the threshold. The dog would park himself right outside the door, chin on paws, eyes fixed forward. Every crack of thunder was met with a twitch of his tail, a shift of his ears. He didn't whine. He didn't pace. He just stayed, still and immovable, like stone forged for the purpose of guarding something precious. It was in those moments Theo curled in the dark with his blanket, Walter half asleep in his chair, and Barron holding the line that Walter felt both pride and ache. Pride that something in this cabin still knew how to protect. Ache that it had ever needed to. The snow continued falling week after week. Icicles grew like glass fangs along the eaves. Inside, the fire burned low, and the days followed a quiet pulse. Until one morning, Walter found Barron in the hallway, nose pressed against the back door. The dog wasn't barking. He wasn't growling. He was just there, staring, frozen. Theo came up behind him, rubbing his eyes. "What's he doing?" the boy whispered. Walter didn't answer. He moved slowly to the window and scanned the woods. Nothing. Just trees. Just snow. But Barron didn't move a knot until Walter opened the door a crack. The scent of pine. The sting of cold. And something else. Something faint. Barron sniffed the air, stepped outside, circled once, and growled deep, low, from the belly. Then he looked back at Walter, ears pinned forward. Not panic, not fear, but warning. Walter shut the door, locked it, and looked down at Theo. "Barron's just doing his job," he said softly, forcing a smile. But that night, when the wind picked up again and Theo slipped into his ship, Barron didn't settle at the door like usual. He stood, the whole night, watching the window, waiting for a shadow only he could smell. The snow began again, just after sundown, soft at first, like a whisper settling over the trees. It painted the pine needles white and blurred the edges of the world beyond the cabin. Inside, the fire crackled low, casting long orange fingers across the wooden floorboards, stretching toward the hallway like they too were searching for warmth. Walter Granger sat hunched in his chair by the hearth, a dog-eared novel open in one hand and a lukewarm mug in the other. Theo lay nearby on the rug, drawing in the fog of the window pane with a stub of charcoal, sketching what he claimed was a sea monster. Barron sat between them, not lounging, not resting but poised, upright. Still, his eyes locked on the back door like it was breathing. "Storm's rolling in quiet tonight," Walter muttered without looking up. "Feels like the kind that creeps under your coat instead of blowing it off." Barron didn't blink. Theo dropped his charcoal. "Barron's staring again," he whispered. "He always stares before something weird." Walter chuckled dryly, turning a page. "That dog stares at the moon and the washing machine. Doesn't mean the world's ending." But even as he said it, he felt the subtle shift, a tension that settled into the cabin's wooden bones like cold into old joints. The air felt thicker, like the silence outside wasn't empty, but listening. Theo shuffled closer to the vent near the baseboard and cocked his head. "Do you hear that?" he asked. Walter raised an eyebrow. "Hear what?" Theo pointed. "In the vent, it's like someone's whispering, like tiny words, like someone breathing really slow." Walter closed his book. The only sound now was the pop of the fire and the gentle hush of snowfall brushing the roof. "There's nothing down there, Theo. Just wind and old pipes." He tried to keep his voice steady, casual. Theo's face tightened. No, Grandpa. I heard it. I swear. Walter stood, joints cracking, and moved to the vent. He knelt, placed a weathered hand near the metal slats. Cold air, faint but steady. Just draft, he said. Cabin this old talks to itself sometimes. But Barron was already moving slow and silent toward the hallway, his ears pinned back, his nose low to the floor. Theo grabbed Walter's sleeve. He hears it too. Barron reached the back door. He stood there, unmoving, then gave a single, deep-throated growl. Not loud, not angry, but long, measured. Walter felt the hairs on his neck rise. Barron growled again, lower this time, and stepped back, placing himself between the door and Theo. Walter crossed the room and opened the utility closet near the rear entrance. Nothing. Just boots, coats, dust. He checked the lock. Still latched. The snow beyond the window was undisturbed. "You're making me paranoid, old boy," Walter muttered, glancing at Barron. But the dog wasn't looking at the door anymore. He was staring at the floor vent. Walter followed his gaze. It was faint, but there was a low rattle, like something brushing against metal from underneath. Too rhythmic for wind, too steady for mice. Theo took a step back. "Grandpa, I want to sleep in your room tonight." Walter hesitated. He hadn't heard fear in Theo's voice like that in a long time since his parents died. Not since that first night he'd woken screaming, saying someone was at his window. "Yeah," Walter said softly. "You can." That night, Walter double-checked every lock, every latch. He slid a chair under the back doorknob like he used to do in Saigon, back when doors were never just wood and hinges but fragile lines between life and death. Theo curled up in Walter's bed, hugging his stuffed raccoon. Barron didn't take his usual spot at the foot of the bed. Instead, he lay in the hallway, facing the back door. All night, he didn't sleep. Every hour, Walter stirred to the sound of Barron shifting just enough to let Walter know he hadn't let his guard down. That something, even if it couldn't be named yet, wasn't right. At 2:17 a.m., Theo whispered from under the blankets, "Grandpa?" "Yeah?" I heard it again. The whisper. It said my name. Walter sat up, fully awake now. "Probably a dream, kiddo." But Theo's voice was so small, so honest. It said, "Theo, don't tell." It was right next to my ear, I swear it. Walter rubbed his face. He looked to the hallway. Barron was still there, wide awake, watching. The old clock on the mantel ticked softly in the dark, its hands trembling toward 3 a.m. Outside, the snow had thickened, blanketing Redwood Hollow in silence, the kind so heavy it made the trees feel like they were holding their breath. Inside the cabin, every light was off, every soul asleep. Until Barron roared, not barked, roared. The sound split the stillness like a lightning crack, deep, guttural, urgent. A sound trained not in fear, but warning. Walter jolted up from the armchair where he'd dozed off. His spine straightened, muscle memory from the war kicking in before thought caught up. Barron stood in the middle of the hallway, hackles raised, teeth bared, eyes locked on the back door. He barked again, this time louder, sharper. The kind of sound that would stop a man in his tracks. From the bedroom came a shriek. "Theo!" Walter rushed in, heart pounding. The boy sat upright in bed, tears streaking down his face, chest heaving, eyes wild with fear. "He was in my room," Theo cried. "I saw him, he was standing right there, in the corner." Walter looked around empty. No broken windows, no open doors, just Theo and the shaking blankets and the dark pressing in around them. Barron barked again, closer now, scratching at the back door. Walter put a hand on Theo's shoulder. "Stay here. Don't move." He grabbed the old shotgun from the rack above the mantel, just like he had decades ago when things went wrong in the jungle. "Easy, Barron," he muttered, stepping closer to the door. "Easy now." He flipped on the porch light. Nothing, just the yard, untouched and silver with moonlight. The snow smooth as porcelain, no tracks, no shadows. Just the wind stirring the trees like they were trying to speak. But Barron didn't stop. He growled again, pacing now, body tense, movement sharp. He was trying to catch a scent. Something was out there, or had been. Walter opened the door slowly, shotgun tight in his grip. The cold hit his lungs like a slap. He scanned the tree line, stepped onto the porch. Still nothing. No tracks, no broken branches, not even the sound of an animal retreating. He turned back to Barron. "There's nothing here." But Barron didn't believe him. He stood planted in the doorway, chest rising and falling, eyes darting to every corner of the clearing. He growled low, a sound that vibrated in his throat like thunder behind the hills. Walter stepped back inside and closed the door with a slow, heavy thud. Then he locked it, deadbolt, chain. Even pushed the old chair back under the knob. Theo had crawled out of bed and was now crouched in the hallway, wrapped in a blanket, his eyes red and wide. "I saw him, Grandpa. I saw a man. He had no face." Walter knelt beside him, brushing a hand through the boy's hair. "It was a nightmare, buddy. Just a dream." "No," Theo said firmly. "He looked at me, but there were no eyes. Just skin, like it melted." Walter felt something cold ripple down his spine, the kind of chill that came from inside your bones. Barron was still growling, not at the door now, but at the floor vent. Walter glanced at it, then at Theo. "I want to sleep next to Barron," Theo whispered. Walter nodded. The rest of the night passed without sleep. Theo curled on the rug, wrapped in every blanket Walter could find. Barron sat beside him, never lying down, never blinking, just staring at the window. Walter sat with his shotgun across his lap, watching both of them. The fire burned low, the clock ticked on, and somewhere outside, the forest breathed. By morning, the snow was deeper, but Barron still hadn't slept, and neither had Walter. The sun rose slowly over Redwood Hollow, casting pale gold light across the thick blanket of snow. It should have been a quiet morning, the kind where breath fogs in the air and coffee steams in a chipped mug on the porch railing. But this morning didn't feel peaceful. Walter stood at the sink, staring out the frosted kitchen window. His fingers clenched around a cup of black coffee gone cold. Barron paced in front of the back door, nose to the floor, tail stiff, ears cocked toward every faint rustle outside. Theo was still asleep on the couch, curled in a nest of blankets with Barron's shedded fur clinging to the fabric. The boy's breathing had finally evened out, but the shadows under his eyes hadn't faded. A knock came at the front door, not loud but deliberate. One knock, then two more. Walter set the cup down, grabbed his coat, and opened it cautiously. It was Donnie Hale, the neighbor who lived a quarter-mile down the road. He was bundled in a thick parka, a knit cap pulled low over his bald head, and his cheeks red from the cold. But his eyes looked uneasy. "Morning, Walt," Donnie said, rubbing his gloves together. "You got a minute?" Walter stepped outside, closing the door softly behind him. "What's going on?" "I saw something strange out by the tree line," Donnie said, lowering his voice. "Thought it was a deer at first, but when I got close it was footprints. Big ones, heavy, human." Walter's jaw tightened. "Could be a hunter." Donnie shook his head. "No tracks in, no tracks out. Just one set. Led straight toward your property. Thought you should know." Barron, who had followed Walter out and stood by his left heel, let out a low growl. Walter didn't wait. "Show me." They cut across the backyard, Barron trotting ahead, nose working overtime. The snow was pristine in most places except one. Just beyond the cluster of birch trees behind the house, the snow was broken. A line of sunken prints, deep and clear, pressed like warnings into the white crust. Walter knelt beside one. The stride was long, purposeful, the impression wide and booted. They led right up to the side of the cabin, right up to Theo's bedroom window. Walter stood slowly. The wind scraped across his skin, but the chill in his chest had nothing to do with weather. He followed the tracks along the wall of the house. They stopped just below the window frame, which sat about 4 feet from the ground. The screen had been pushed slightly, a jar barely noticeable. But worse were the scratches, jagged gouges, just beneath the lock, like someone had tried something and given up, or been scared off. Barron growled again and shoved his nose toward the marks, stiffening. Walter's hand found the shotgun strap slung over his shoulder. He glanced once more at the woods, then turned back toward the front of the house. "I'm calling the sheriff," he said flatly. Donnie swallowed. "You think someone tried to—" "I don't think," Walter cut in. "I know." Inside the cabin, Theo had woken up and was sitting cross-legged on the couch, cradling a mug of warm milk. He looked small, lost in the oversized blanket, his hair sticking up in soft cowlicks. Walter knelt in front of him. "You said you saw someone last night," he said gently. Theo nodded slowly. He was in the room, but he didn't open the window. Just watched me, then vanished. Baron laid his head in Theo's lap. The boy's fingers threaded through the thick fur on instinct. Walter stood and reached for the landline mounted on the kitchen wall. The line clicked once before ringing. "This is Sheriff Nolan." The voice crackled on the other end. "Go ahead." "Sheriff, it's Walter Granger," he said. "I need someone out here. Today." "What's happened?" "There were footprints outside my grandson's window. Fresh. Last night, Baron went crazy barking. This morning, scratch marks near the lock." A pause. Then Nolan's voice dropped. "I'll be there in 20. Don't touch anything else." Walter hung up and rested his hands on the counter. The cabin felt different now. Like the walls had eyes. Like the snow itself was hiding secrets. Theo looked at him, fear quiet in his voice. "Is he coming back?" Walter turned to him, gaze steady. "No," he said, as much a promise to himself as to the boy. "Not while we've got Baron." And Baron Silent now stood by the window, ears perked, staring out into the trees like he'd never stopped watching. The sheriff's cruiser pulled up just before noon, crunching over the snow-packed drive like a heavy exhale in the silence. A dusting of powder lifted around the tires, disturbed only by the slow creak of two deputies stepping out, their uniforms sharp against the pale backdrop. Sheriff Nolan was not among them. Instead, Deputy Halvers stepped forward, his breath fogging in the air, eyes squinting beneath his cap. Behind him trailed Deputy Ross, younger, lankier, with a clipboard already in hand, as if this were just another routine disturbance to cross off before lunch. Walter stood on the porch, stoic as stone, with Baron beside him still as a shadow, eyes never blinking. The dog hadn't stopped watching the tree line since dawn. "Morning, Mr. Granger," Halvers called out, his voice too casual. "Sheriff said you had some prints to show us?" Walter didn't answer right away. He just turned, motioning with a sharp tilt of his head. "Back here." They followed him around the cabin, boots crunching through the snow. Theo watched from the window above, face half hidden behind the curtain, his breath leaving soft clouds on the glass. Halvers crouched when they reached the disturbed snow beneath the window. He studied the tracks briefly, then glanced up at the scratches near the lock. Ross scribbled something on the clipboard more performative than investigative. "Looks like someone was poking around," Halvers muttered. "But no break-in, no property damage. Might have been a drifter passing through, or some kid playing games." Walter's jaw tensed. "A drifter doesn't stare into a child's window and scratch at the lock." Ross offered a hollow chuckle. "Could have been an animal, bear or coyote maybe." Baron growled low at that, a sound like a distant engine, rising from deep in his chest. Walter didn't bother to hide the edge in his voice. "That's no coyote's print, and my dog's trained for war. He doesn't bark at rabbits." Halvers stood, brushing off his gloves. "I get it, Mr. Granger. I do. But it's been a long winter. Cabin fever's real. People hear things. Dogs get jumpy. Nothing's missing. Nothing's broken. No one got hurt." He looked over his shoulder, clearly ready to leave. "If anything else comes up, give us a call. We'll put an extra patrol car on the highway. Might catch someone hitching through." Walter said nothing. Ross nodded like he'd solved something. "Honestly, with that canine watching the house, I'd say you're safer than most." They left shortly after, tires spinning slightly before catching traction. As the cruiser disappeared down the snowy road, the silence returned, but it felt heavier now. Not empty, just abandoned. Inside the cabin, Theo sat at the table, drawing. Crayons spread like shrapnel across the wood. His picture was a house, a forest, and a pair of eyes in the dark. Walter poured himself a coffee he didn't want. "They're not coming back," he muttered. Theo looked up. "They don't believe us, do they?" "No," Walter said. "They don't." That night, Walter double-checked every lock. He slid a chair beneath the doorknob, covered the vents, tucked Theo in with an extra blanket and a flashlight under his pillow. But it was Baron who said the most without a word. Instead of curling up at Walter's feet like usual, the old German shepherd lay down outside Theo's bedroom door, head on paws, ears half raised. Every few minutes he'd lift his snout and sniff the air, chest barely rising. Watching, waiting. Walter paused before heading to his own room, one hand on the wall, the other rubbing his tired eyes. He looked down the hallway where Baron stood sentinel and let out a breath that shivered its way through his ribs. He didn't say it aloud, but he felt it. Something had come into their woods, and it wasn't done watching. The first time Walter noticed, it was almost midnight. He'd gone to check on Theojust, his usual quiet round before bedand. Found the boys' room empty. The blankets on the bed were untouched, his nightlight still glowing faint amber against the far wall. For one awful second, Walter's heart stopped. Then he saw it, the closet door slightly ajar, the faintest whisper of movement from within. He approached, slow and careful, as though not to spook a deer. He bent down and opened the door. Theo sat cross-legged between a stack of board games and an old crate of winter coats, wrapped in his sleeping bag like armor. He blinked up at Walter, calm but wary, like a soldier caught in the act of something sacred. "What are you doing in here, kid?" Walter asked gently. Theo shrugged. "It's warm." Walter frowned. "Your bed's warm." "I like it better here," Theo mumbled, pulling the sleeping bag tighter. "It feels safer." Walter didn't press, just ruffled the boy's hair, muttered something about not staying too long in tight spaces, and backed out of the closet. But even as he walked away, something about the moment sat wrong in his gut. Theo hadn't looked scared, not exactly, but there was a stillness to him, a hyper-awareness Walter knew too well. He'd seen it in men crouched in jungle brush, waiting for the wrong kind of silence to break. Over the next few days, the closet became Theo's new fortress. After school, he'd beeline for it past the kitchen, past Baron waiting with his usual tail-thump greeting, and slip quietly into the narrow space like he was returning to something sacred. Sometimes he brought flashlights and books. Sometimes he just sat there, knees hugged to his chest, watching the shadows between coats. Walter started leaving the door cracked open on purpose, but every night, he'd find it closed again, locked from the inside with a chair shoved up under the handle. He tried not to overreact. Kids had strange phases. He remembered making bunkers out of couch cushions and pretending monsters couldn't get him under the bed. But this felt different. This wasn't play. One afternoon, as snow began to fall again outside, Walter gently called Theo out for dinner. No answer. He tapped the door lightly. "Come on, soldier. Chow time." Theo opened the closet door an inch. His eyes were wide, unblinking. "Do you hear them?" he whispered. Walter paused. "Hear what?" Theo pointed to the corner vent above his bed. "The voices in the wall. Sometimes they whisper at night. Sometimes they knock." Walter's spine stiffened, but his voice stayed calm. "Might be the wind, kid. Old cabin makes strange sounds in winter. Pipes groaning, wood shifting." Theo shook his head. "They say my name." Walter crouched down. "You've had some rough dreams lately. That happens. I used to dream about choppers and fire when I came back from the war." Theo looked away. "Baron hears it too. That's why he sleeps in the hall." Walter glanced over. Baron was watching them from the doorway, ears up, tail motionless. That night, Walter stayed up later than usual, sipping coffee that had gone bitter. He sat on the porch as the snow fell in quiet spirals, the wind sharp enough to sting his cheeks. His hands trembled not from the cold, but from memory. He'd been wrong to brush it off. The look in Theo's eyes wasn't make-believe. It was the same look a man wore when he knew something was out there, and no one else believed him. Later, when he went to bed, Baron didn't follow. The old K9 curled up right outside Theo's closet door instead, head pressed to the wood, listening. Walter stared at the ceiling for hours that night, and somewhere, faintly between the groan of old wood and the hush of the wind, he thought he heard a whisper. But when he got up to check, the house was silent. Still, almost too still. The sound of nails tapping wood echoed faintly down the hallways, oft, steady, persistent. Walter stirred in bed. He blinked at the dark ceiling, listening. Tap, tap, pause. Then again, tap, 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 like a heartbeat trying to speak. He sat up, hand instinctively reaching for the revolver in his nightstand. 30 years since Vietnam, and the instinct never left. His fingers brushed cold steel, but he didn't draw. Not yet. Instead, he slipped on his boots, pulled his flannel tight, and opened the bedroom door. Baron was pacing again. The old German shepherd moved like a soldier, mid-patrol, shoulders taut, steps precise, nose close to the ground as he scanned invisible borders. He passed Theo's room once, twice, then doubled back, pausing before the door. The light under it flickered. Walter stepped quietly into the hallway. "Baron?" he called softly. The dog didn't look back. He let out a low, anxious whine, ears pinned, tail stiff not in fear, but in warning. Walter stepped closer. "Easy, boy." Baron padded to the closet door and sat. But he didn't rest. He stared at the vent in the upper corner of Theo's room, the one above the bed, where warm air hummed in faint pulses. His eyes narrowed. His breathing deepened. Then suddenly, he growled. Not loud, not dramatic, just a steady, guttural rumble from deep in his chest. Theo's door creaked open. The boy stood there in pajama pants and wool socks, eyes sleepy but wary. "He heard it again," he whispered. Walter glanced at the vent. "He's just old. Maybe smelling a squirrel stuck in the walls." Baron barked on, sharp and abrupt. Not at the wall, at Walter. It was the kind of bark that demanded attention, not obedience. A warning shot. Then, without further hesitation, Baron lunged. His front paws struck the wall beneath the vent. Then again, scratching, clawing, digging at air. Dust fell like snow from the vent grill as his nails struck the wood. Theo covered his ears. Walter pulled the dog back by the collar, not with anger, but urgency. "That's enough," he muttered, heart racing. But Baron didn't fight him. He stood firm, panting, eyes locked on the vent with a focus that chilled Walter more than the cold air seeping through the windows. That night, Baron didn't sleep. Walter left his bedroom door open and watched as the dog resumed his patrol, pacing from Theo's closet to the living room window, down the hallway, back again. Every creak of the floorboards was matched by Baron's ears twitching, head snapping toward shadows. Around 3 a.m., the wind howled. It came with a sharp shift in the cabin's temperature, as if the cold outside had found its way in through unseen cracks. Baron stopped in front of the vent again. He tilted his head. Walter was just about to rise when the dog let out a single low-pitched bark. He didn't move this time. He stood there rigid, tail horizontal, ears forward. Then, in one swift motion, he jumped up again and began clawing at the air vent with frantic urgency. His teeth snapped at the grill. Paint chipped off the wall. A bolt rattled free and clattered to the floor. Theo stood behind Walter now, hugging his stuffed bear, wide-eyed. "I heard it," he whispered. Walter turned. "What?" Theo pointed. "It said my name." Walter stepped forward, slowly. The vent was still intact, but barely. Behind it, darkness yawned like a tunnel. There shouldn't have been anything in there. Just ductwork, old insulation, maybe a dead mouse. But something about it felt hollow. Not just physically, but wrong in a way Walter couldn't explain. He felt Baron press up against his side, warm and tense. The silence deepened. Then scratch. Soft, like a branch brushing glass. But inside the wall, Walter stiffened. He looked down at Theo, then at Baron. Neither moved. The cabin had gone so still he could hear the drip from the kitchen faucet 30 feet away. Baron stepped forward and did something he hadn't done in years, she whimpered. Not out of fear, out of knowing. The scream wasn't real. It had been years since the war, but Walter still heard it. Ragged, guttural, drenched in blood and sand, he jolted upright in bed, breath snagged in his throat like barbed wire. The cabin was dark, but the memory flared like napalm behind his eyes. "Granger, get down!" His hand reached out on instinct, fumbling for a rifle that no longer leaned beside the cot. There was no cot, no bunker, no hot wind. Only the still cold of Redwood Hollow and the soft creak of pine branches shifting under snow outside. Walter's hand found the revolver in the drawer. His chest rose and fell with sharp, fractured gasps. Sweat slid down his temples. Somewhere, in the back of his skull, the past still pulsed. "Where's Ramos?" "They hit the supply truck." "Sarge, we're surrounded." And then the sound clear as yesterday of the young soldier named Devlin screaming before the RPG lit up the earth like Judgment Day. Walter doubled over, elbows on his knees, rubbing at his face as if he could scrub the memories out. He hadn't had a flashback like that in years. Not since before Theo came to live with him. Not since he'd buried all the medals in a tin box behind the barn and stopped looking at old photos. But it was creeping back. It always did when things felt too quiet for too long. He stood up, legs aching, and moved slowly into the hallway. The cabin stretched before him like a long tunnel carved through silence. Only the old wooden floor spoke, groaning beneath his steps. He didn't call out. He didn't want to wake Theo, but as he passed the living room, he stopped. The light was on, dim, a soft amber from the little battery-powered lantern they kept on the bookshelf in case of storms. And there, curled together at the base of the wall, were Baron and Theo. The boy was wrapped in a plaid blanket, hugging Baron like a life raft. His face was nestled in the dog's fur, eyes closed, but brows furrowed in unease. Baron's body curled protectively around him, tail swathed over the child's legs, chin resting on Theo's back. But Baron wasn't asleep. The old shepherd stared directly at Walter, eyes glowing faintly in the low light, like sentinels beneath ancient armor. Walter crouched, lowering himself slowly, every movement deliberate. He didn't speak at first. He just looked at them. Two survivors, two pieces of his broken world, held together by something he couldn't name. Theo stirred. "I was cold," he whispered without opening his eyes. Walter nodded. "This house gets drafty in winter." Theo turned slightly. "Baron came and got me." Walter looked at the dog. His ears twitched slightly. "Was there a sound again?" Theo nodded slowly. "But I think it was just my head." Walter exhaled, kneeling beside them. "Maybe," he said, and then added gently, "maybe not." Theo looked up at him, eyes glassy. "Sometimes I feel like someone's trying to talk to me through the walls." Walter's jaw tensed. He glanced at the vent above them, the same one Baron had clawed at 2 nights ago. Theo's voice was softer now. "And sometimes I dream about people I don't know. Men yelling, sand, fire." Walter's stomach twisted. He looked at the boy, again same eyes as his daughter, the same haunted depth he used to see in the mirror. Theo blinked. "Is that from you?" Silence. Walter stared into his grandson's face, the question lingering like smoke between them. He finally said, "Maybe." Then he added, "But none of it's your fault." Theo nodded, but his voice barely rose above a breath. "I don't want to make you sad." Walter felt something crack. He reached over and pulled Theo into his arms. The boy was all bones and warmth and unspoken fears. Baron, sensing the shift, stood up and sat beside them like a guardian. Walter closed his eyes. "I miss your mom," he murmured, voice rough as sandpaper. Theo didn't say anything, but he nodded against Walter's chest, and for a long moment, they sat there, 3 shadows stitched together by grief, memory, and the unspoken language of survival. The wind outside whistled low, brushing against the windows like breath on glass. Baron didn't move, but his ears twitched again. Somewhere, deep within the walls, something shifted. It was too subtle for Walter to be sure, but Baron heard it, and Baron never lied. The snow had fallen steady through the night, blanketing Redwood Hollow in a stillness so thick it muffled even the morning birdsong. The trees stood heavy and silent, their dark needles draped in white. A kind of hush had settled over the hollow knot, peaceful but unnerving, like the woods were holding their breath. Walter noticed it before he even stepped onto the porch. Baron was already at the door, ears forward, tail stiff. He hadn't moved from that spot since before sunrise. Theo shuffled in, still in flannel pajamas, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Why's Baron staring like that?" Walter adjusted the strap of his boots, eyes narrowing. "Something's off." Theo followed his grandfather's gaze through the frosted front window. 2 sheriff cruisers had rolled up on the road that wound through the pines. One stopped near the old Miller fence. The other kept going slow, methodical, tires crunching snow as it disappeared toward the Wilkes farm. That's when the phone rang. Walter knew before he answered that it wasn't good. "Granger," he said into the receiver. "Walt, it's Helen from the diner," came the voice on the other end, breathless. "Have you heard?" He hadn't. But something in her tone flipped the switch in his gut, the one that had lain dormant since Cambodia. Since the night half his unit vanished in the jungle mist. "Who?" Helen's voice trembled. "Emily Carver. She didn't make it home from school yesterday." Walter went quiet. She always walks that same trail through the ridge, Helen continued. Just a quarter mile from your place. Her folks thought maybe she stayed late or came to your cabin. No, Walter cut in. She didn't. I didn't think so. Search teams are headed out now. Sheriff's out front of their house. Whole town's turning out. She paused, her voice now a whisper. Walt. They found her backpack in the snow. Torn strap. No tracks going forward, just gone. And Walter hung up without saying goodbye. Theo was still watching him. What's wrong? Walter's tone was flat, but something dark moved behind his eyes. Emily's missing. Theo froze. His fingers tightened around the edge of the table. She was just at school with me, he said quietly. She always takes the trail behind the fence. Walter nodded slowly. Yeah, I know. Yeah. Barron let out a low growl and stepped to the window again, pressing his nose to the glass, fogging the corner with his breath. Walter grabbed his coat. Stay inside with Barron. Theo shook his head, panicked. No, two want to help. Walter looked at him, then down at Barron, who now stood rigid like a statue, muscles coiled beneath his thick fur. Not this time, kiddo. Theo's voice cracked. But I know where she plays in the woods, near that old bridge. She showed me the hollow tree with the bird bones. Walter's voice cut in soft, but firm. I said no. He'd already strapped the holster under his coat. The .45 hadn't left its case in years. Until today, there was something heavy in the air. A weight that wasn't snow. It pulled at Walter's bones, like it was trying to remind him of things he'd spent decades forgetting. Fear had a scent. He remembered that from war, and whatever had taken Emmy stank of it. Outside, the search teams were gathering. Locals in orange vests with flashlights. Deputies marking off sections of the woods. Snowmobiles, drone units. A K-9 handler from the county called in just hours ago. Walter made it down the porch steps when a voice stopped him. Walt? He turned. Sheriff Nolan, face drawn. Eyes tired. Too young for that uniform, Walter had always thought. Good man, but not built for chaos. We've got a 2-mile radius mapped out, Nolan said, holding a clipboard with trembling fingers. Dogs are combing the ridge trail. Walter scanned the tree line behind the Carver property. She wouldn't go that far off course. Not unless someone or something made her. Nolan glanced at him sharply. You think it's an abduction? Walter didn't answer, not out loud. But Barron's instincts, Theo's whispers in the night. The footprints outside the window wall of it coiled around his mind like a wire ready to snap. Where was the backpack found? Near mile marker 6. Snow was disturbed, but the trail just ends. Walter narrowed his eyes. You mean like it was covered? No, Nolan said slowly. Like the rest of her just disappeared. Walter's jaw tightened. I want to see it. Nolan hesitated. Walt, you're not law anymore. Hell, neither were the men who died in 71, Walter said quietly. But I still remember what it smells like when something hunts in silence. The sheriff's throat worked. Finally, he nodded toward his truck. Come on then. As they drove, Barron stood on the porch watching, ears perked. Theo pressed his hands against the window, face pale. He knew. Somewhere deep inside, the boy knew that something old had stirred in the woods. Something that didn't care for fences or flashlights or the rules of ordinary towns. And Walter Hay was starting to remember what it felt like. To lose someone in the dark, to be too late, and to never forgive yourself for it. The snow outside hadn't let up since morning. It painted everything in a cold silence. A kind of quiet that didn't feel peaceful anymore. It felt watched. Inside the cabin, Theo sat cross-legged at the kitchen table, surrounded by scattered crayons and half-sipped hot chocolate. Barron lay beside him, unmoving but alert, his eyes locked on the hallway, specifically the narrow vent just above the floorboards where he'd scratched nights before. Walter hadn't said much since he returned from the ridge. His coat was still dusted with snow, the same as his boots. He stood at the window, hand resting on the frame, jaw tight, staring into the tree line like it might blink first. But Theo wasn't watching the trees. He was drawing. The crayon moved slowly in his hand, the lines deliberate, not the usual childish loops or scribbled forests he used to make. These lines were thick, angular, heavy, almost like he wasn't drawing from imagination, but from memory. Walter turned as he heard the scratch of crayon on paper stretch out longer than normal. He hadn't even noticed Theo grab the sketch pad. He crossed the room and glanced down. The sight of the drawing froze him in place. It wasn't a landscape. It wasn't even abstract. It was a girl small, hair tied in pigtails, crouched behind what looked like iron bars. Her eyes were wide, mouth open in a scream. One hand reached out through the bars, the fingers contorted in a way that made Walter's skin crawl. Behind her stood a shape dark, looming, not fully drawn, but undeniably male. The figure's face was lost in a thick scrawl of black, but the shoulders were square, the posture still predatory. To the side, drawn with strange care, was something even more unnerving. A small square box embedded in the wall, with a circle in the middle, like a lens. A camera. Walter slowly sank to one knee beside Theo. "Hey," he said, voice low. "What's this?" Theo didn't look at him. He was still coloring the corners of the bars. "It's Emily." Walter swallowed. "How do you know that?" "I saw her." Walter's heart skipped. "When? Where?" Theo finally looked up. His voice was quiet, but certain. "In the wall." Walter stared at him, unsure whether to respond or simply breathe through the chill curling down his spine. "Two couldn't sleep," Theo went on, "and I heard whispering again. But it wasn't like before. It sounded scared, like crying. I crawled into the closet, but I didn't close the door this time." He looked toward the hallway. I looked at the vent. Walter's eyes followed. Theo continued. "It wasn't just air moving. There was something else. A flicker, like a little light. So I put my head down to listen, and I saw it in my mind. Like the picture just came in. Like a movie, but without sound." He touched the page gently. "She's in a small room. No windows. Only one door. And someone's watching her. Through that." He pointed to the tiny camera. Walter's mouth went dry. "You're saying there's a room? With a camera? Inside the wall?" Theo didn't answer, but the look in his eyes wasn't fantasy. It wasn't the soft blur of a child's imagination. It was sharp, haunted. Walter picked up the drawing, studying every line. The bars, the camera, the darkness beyond the girl, and that figure. That awful black mass of scribbled silence. It had a hand-long, pale fingers, one of them crooked unnaturally. Walter's throat tightened. He remembered the scratches on the window lock, the voice in Theo's closet, and now, this. Baron rose to his feet without warning, tail low, ears twitching. He let out a low growl and walked slowly to the hallway nose, leading him again toward the same air vent. He stopped there and barked on sharp and sudden. Theo flinched. Walter set the drawing down on the table and followed the dog. The vent was old, slatted metal, painted over a dozen times. Walter knelt in front of it and pressed his ear against the cold grate. Nothing. He waited. Then soft, faint. So faint he could almost convince himself he imagined it. A sound, a shuffle, a mechanical whir, like a small motor turning. He jerked back. Baron growled again, claws clicking as he circled the spot. Walter turned to Theo. "When you said you saw it in your head, do you mean like a dream?" Theo shook his head. "Number. It was like someone put it there." "Ugh." Walter's hands trembled as he stood. This wasn't a nightmare. This wasn't trauma speaking. He picked up the phone and dialed the sheriff's office. Again. It rang 4 times before a voice answered. "Redwood Hollow Sheriff's Department. Nolan, it's Walter. You need to come back." A pause. Then, "Walt, we've got every unit searching the forest." "I know, but I think you're looking in the wrong place." "What do you mean?" Walter glanced back at the drawing on the table. At Theo, sitting silently with the crayon still in his hand. At Baron, who now lay curled in front of the vent like a guardian. His voice was gravel. "I think she's underground." The fire had burned down to quiet embers by the time Walter shut off the living room light. Theo had been tucked in almost an hour now, curled beneath the worn green quilt Walter's wife had sewn years before. The boy hadn't said much since, showing the drawing, just stared at the vent in his room with a silence too old for 7. Walter left the door cracked open, just like Theo liked, and let Baron settle into his usual place at the threshold. The shepherd was more than vigilant these days. She was tense, coiled, like a wire stretched too tight. But tonight, even more than usual, his body held something electric. His breathing wasn't slow like sleep. It was paced, waiting. The house groaned under the weight of the wind outside, sharp against the roof tiles. In the distance, coyotes howled, but Walter didn't hear them. What he heard was silence, too complete. And then snap. Not loud, just sharp, like something cracking under tension. Then Barron's growl deep, guttural, a sound that hadn't come from him in years, not during storms, not even when a bear passed near the back fence last fall. Walter sat up instantly. A second later, the growl exploded into a snarl. The hallway thundered with paws hitting wood. Walter rushed out of his bedroom just in time to see the massive German shepherd launch himself at Theo's closet door. The slam echoed like a gunshot. "Barron!" Walter shouted. But the dog wasn't listening. His claws raked furiously at the painted wood. He pawed, shoved, then bit the doorknob, jerking sideways with strength that startled even Walter. The latch cracked. The door swung open with a splintered whine. Theo sat bolt upright in bed, eyes wide, barely able to scream before Walter reached him. But Barron didn't come near the boy. He was inside the closet now, head low, tail stiff, muscles rippling as he clawed violently at the back wall. The inner wall. "Theo, behind me," Walter said, moving between the boy and the closet. He grabbed Barron by the scruff, tried to pull him back. "Barron, enough. Stand down." But the dog was wild, growling, thrashing. Foam touched his lips, and his eyes glinted with a fury Walter hadn't seen since the IED unit back in Ghazni when Barron dragged his handler out of a crater under fire. This wasn't aggression. This was pure alarm. Barron barked again and lunged, slamming his paws into the drywall with such force the sheetrock cracked. Dust puffed out. A noise echoed ettle and hollow behind it. Theo gasped. "There's something back there." Walter felt the air shift. Cold. Wrong. Like a draft that hadn't been there seconds before. Barron kept clawing. Walter reached out, grabbed the dog's collar with both hands, and hauled backward. "Easy, Barron. Hey, it's me." It took everything in him, but he dragged the shepherd back far enough for the dog to stop clawing just for a heartbeat. Barron twisted in his grip, snarling not at Walter but toward the back wall. He dropped his weight to the floor, tail low, ears flat, and stared at the vent just beside the cracked sheetrock. And then, with terrifying precision, he lunged at the vent. Metal clanged as he struck it with his paws. The cover bent inward. Walter dropped to his knees, chest pounding. He looked closer. The slats were crooked. One screw had been loosened. That wasn't how it looked this morning. Barron let out a warning bark that sent Theo into a quiet sob. Walter turned back toward his grandson. "It's okay, kiddo. He's telling us something." Theo rubbed his eyes with his sleeve. "Is there a person in there?" Walter didn't answer. He couldn't. He reached for the flashlight on the bedside table and returned to the closet, flicking it on and aiming it into the vent's mouth. Dust particles floated in the narrow beam. And something else. In the back, against the far inside edge of the ducting, was a dark smudge-like something had been rubbed there. Something oily. Barron whined again, pacing beside him. Walter pulled out his multi-tool, unscrewed the bent grate, and held his breath. Inside the wall was a tight crawl space, just wide enough for ducting. But it wasn't just venting material. Someone had cut access holosmall circular ones with frayed plastic along the edges. Not factory-made. Not by accident. Barron growled deep. And Walter finally said it out loud. "There's someone using the vent system." He turned to Theo. "Did you hear anything tonight? Voices?" Theo shook his head. "Only Barron." Walter's mind raced. He had to think. He had to act. But every part of his training told him one thing. They weren't alone in this house. And whatever Barron had sensed, whatever had driven him to break protocol, shatter calm, tear through wood and steel, it wasn't going to wait much longer. Walter rose, hand on Barron's neck. The dog didn't resist now. He was focused, eyes sharp, muscles trembling not from fear but duty. He was trying to protect them from something unseen, and he would die before letting it near Theo. Walter backed out of the room slowly, Theo behind him. He didn't close the closet door. He just left it open, left the wall exposed, and whispered, almost more to himself than to anyone else, Let's see if you come out." The house was dead quiet by morning. Theo had finally drifted off on the living room couch, his small frame curled beneath Baron's watchful eyes. The dog hadn't moved all night, except to glance occasionally down the hallway toward the still-open closet door. Walter didn't sleep. He sat in the kitchen, coffee gone cold, flashlight beside his hand. The vent, cover-bent and dirty-dressed it on the table like some grotesque souvenir. The memory of Baron's fury, the crack in the drywall, the sound of Theo whispering, "Is there someone in there?" It all pulsed in his head like a dull, poisonous drum. By sunrise, he'd made up his mind. It was time to look inside. Not just glance, not just peek, but go in. Walter gathered his tools, a crowbar, a cordless drill, gloves, and the heavy-duty flashlight he hadn't used since his deployment. Baron trailed him closely, tail stiff, head low. Theo still slept, unaware. Inside the closet, the air felt colder than it should have. Not the chill of early morning, but something that didn't belong in a house this old. Walter knelt, hand brushing against the jagged drywall crack. He began to pull it away piece by piece until the exposed duct and insulation gave way to an oddly hollow chamber behind the wall. Not wide, not deep, but just enough for someone small or determined. He paused. The flashlight caught something metallic, pressed into the back of the vent's interior, wedged carefully between two beam swaths, a black cube, no larger than a baseball. A blinking red light glowed faintly from the corner. Walter's breath caught. It was a camera, not some cheap plastic toy. This was professional, minimal casing, infrared capable, and it had been pointed directly into Theo's room. He didn't say a word. He simply reached for it, gloves on, heart pounding louder with each inch. As he pulled it free, a whisper of movement from inside the wall made him freeze. Scratching, not from rats. Not mechanical, deliberate. He backed away slowly, every muscle in his body screaming to move, but he kept his pace steady. Baron stiffened beside him, hackles rising. Whatever was in there, it wasn't done watching. But neither was he. By 10 a.m., Walter was at the sheriff's office. The morning sun cut through the windows, illuminating dust motes dancing lazily in the air. A poster about a missing dog, a fated dare, sign, and a corkboard filled with church events gave the place the illusion of safety. But Walter wasn't here for small-town comfort. He placed the camera on Deputy Marla Ridge's desk. Her eyes widened. "What's this?" Walter folded his arms. "Pulled it out of my grandson's closet vent." Marla hesitated. "A baby monitor or something?" "It's not a baby monitor. It's high-end surveillance gear, wired for motion and infrared. And someone planted it behind drywall in a child's room." Marla stared, suddenly unsure how to speak. She picked it up carefully, turning it over. Sheriff Daniels appeared from the hallway, sipping coffee. "Morning, Walt." I need a forensic sweep," Walter said, voice level. "Someone's been crawling inside the air vents in my house," watching Theo. This was aimed at his bed. The sheriff blinked. "You saying your house was bugged?" "I'm not saying," Walter replied. "I'm showing." Daniels walked closer, took the camera from Marla's hands. He turned it slowly, then exhaled through his nose. "Where'd you get this?" "Behind a wall, closet vent. My dog went ballistic last night. Started tearing into the drywall like something was behind it. He led me right to this." Daniels glanced at Marla. She shrugged. "Could be from the previous owners," the sheriff muttered. "It was on," Walter snapped. "Blinking. Still warm. Whoever installed it knew what they were doing." Daniels scratched the back of his neck. "You want me to put out an alert for some kind of peeper?" Walter didn't blink. "I want you to treat this like a threat. To a child. This isn't raccoons in the crawlspace, Sheriff." There was a pause. Then Daniels nodded, but his eyes didn't quite match the motion. "We'll bag it. Send it up to County Techs. See what comes back." Walter narrowed his eyes. "And in the meantime, we look into it. Quietly. Don't want the town in a panic over a loose wire or old equipment." "You think this is old equipment?" Walter's voice cracked. "You think my PTSD's flaring up again and I imagined a camera wired into my house?" "I didn't say that." Baron let out a low growl from beside Walter's leg. Daniels looked at the dog uneasily. "He's been off lately, hasn't he?" "No," Walter said. "He's been the only one paying attention." Back at home, the air felt different. Walter closed and locked every window, every vent, every crawlspace access he could find. He rechecked the attic, replaced the closet panel with plywood, and duct-taped it shut from the outside. Theo watched from the couch, hugging Barron close. "Did they catch the bad guy?" he asked. Walter knelt beside him, brushed the boy's hair gently. "Not yet," he said. Barron rested his head on Theo's lap but kept one eye on the hallway fixed, unblinking, waiting. Walter didn't tell Theo the truth. Didn't tell him the deputies had looked spooked, yes, but not nearly spooked enough. Didn't mention that no one had asked where the feed from the camera was going, or what else might be hiding behind the walls of their own home. That night, Walter slept with the shotgun by his bed again. And Barron? Barron didn't sleep at all. The sky over Redwood Hollow hung low and bruised, clouds the color of old gunmetal pressing against the tops of the pines. Walter steered his pickup down Main Street, windows fogged by his breath, Barron riding shotgun head high, nostrils flaring at every unfamiliar scent that drifted in through the cracked vent. He'd left Theo with Helen at the diner, armed with hot cocoa and enough coloring books to keep a small army busy. The boy had protested at first, but Barron's soft whine and a gentle nudge from Walter's calloused hand convinced him. "Just a few hours," Walter promised. "I need to check some paperwork." What he didn't say was that the sheriff's shrug still echoed in his ears, that a blinking camera pried from his grandson's wallet, a missing 8-year-old girl, should have lit sirens in every office in the county. Instead, it had been filed under further review. So Walter went hunting the way he used to, alone. The town clerk's office smelled of lemon polish and stale coffee. Shelves sagged beneath ledgers dating back to the Depression, handwritten lines of ink that traced marriages, mortgages, and most important today building permits. The clerk, Mrs. Larkin, peered over her bifocals as Walter signed the visitor log. "Looking for something specific, Mr. Granger?" "Maintenance permits on my cabin," he said, forcing a polite smile. "Anything from the last 5 years." She pointed him toward a row of metal filing cabinets, labeled Property Improvements. Walter dug through drawers until the cold in his fingers burned away, scanning faded triplicate forms, roof repairs, septic inspections. Then maintenance and ventilation upgrade, work order 1148, contractor, Northridge Integrated Services. The permit was rubber-stamped 6 months before he purchased the cabin. No signature from a licensed foreman, just a P.O. Box address and a 5-digit phone number that began with an area code he'd never seen. He copied every detail, thanked the clerk, and stepped back into the brittle afternoon light, heart thumping like rotors over the jungle. Barron matched his pace to the truck, ears swiveling as if he too smelled the lie on the page. At the Redwood Hollow Library 2 blocks and 1,000 years of peace away from the war in Walter's Guth, sat before an aging desktop, fingers hovering over the keyboard. He typed Northridge Integrated Services into 3 search engines. No website, no business listings, no Better Business Bureau compliant. All he found was a single cached PDF, an HVAC safety bulletin citing Northridge Integrated for failing to register technicians in North Dakota 6 years ago. The contact email bounced back undeliverable. The listed phone rang twice, then dissolved into white noise. Walter leaned back, rubbing the scar above his eyebrow, a gift from shrapnel at Quezon. Barron, lying beneath the desk, whined softly and nudged his boot. "It's smoke," Walter muttered. "A name made of smoke." He printed the PDF anyway and folded it into his jacket. Next stop, the previous owner of the cabin, a widower named Charles Tillman who'd moved south after selling up. Walter found him via a utility forwarding record and, after 3 awkward calls to distant relatives, a number that rang in Florida. Tillman's voice was brittle with age. "Yes, I hired someone to upgrade the vents. A fellow left a flyer looked official enough. Gave me a good price. I paid cash." "Did you ever see a crew?" Walter asked. "Just 2 vans. Came at night. Said they'd finish by morning so the fumes wouldn't bother me. I stayed at my sister's." Walter's grip tightened on the phone. "You kept any invoices?" "Only a receipt with that Northridge name." "Why? Something happened up there?" Walter swallowed. "Nothing that's your fault, sir. Stay warm." He hung up before the tremor in his voice betrayed him. Barron pressed his head into Walter's thigh as if to say, "I hear it tooth crack in your armor." The address on the permit led to a strip mall post office 20 miles out, a place too small for anonymity, yet perfect for someone who never wanted to be found. Walter stepped inside. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Rows of metal boxes gleamed like teeth. He asked the clerk about box 921. The woman glanced at a ledger, shook her head. Rented for 6 months, prepaid in cash, never renewed, no forwarding. Who picked up the mail? Courier service once a week. Different driver every time. Walter thanked her and walked back out, snow crunching under his boots. Across the parking lot, Barron paced in the truck bed, tail stiff. He'd begun to vibrate whenever Walter grew tense as if the dog's nerves were wired to his heartbeat. "Nothing," Walter muttered, hands on the steering wheel. A contractor that worked at night, a phone that's static, an address that's empty. Barron whined. Walter's thoughts spiraled. A shell company or a hunting blind. A way to move in, install hardware, and vanish before the paint dries. He stared at the horizon where the pines met the sky. Somewhere beyond those trees, 8-year-old Emily Carver was still missing. Somewhere in the walls of his own home, strangers had drilled holes and watched his grandson sleep. The anger came slow, like sap warming in winter, thick and inexorable. He looked down at Barron. "Time to go home, partner." Dusk draped the cabin in long blue shadows by the time Walter pulled in. Theo sat at the window, face brightening the moment he saw the truck. Walter managed a tired smile as he stepped inside and ruffled the boy's hair. "You find anything?" Theo asked. "Pieces," Walter said, hanging his coat. "Bits of a puzzle somebody doesn't want finished." Barron padded to the hallway vent and lay down, chin on paws, eyes fixed. Theo followed his gaze, silent. Walter knelt, took the boy's small hand in his own. "We're gonna fix this, Theo, I promise." Theo nodded, but his eyes drifted to the vent past Walter, past the safety of the room to the hollow darkness beyond. Some promises, Walter knew, were forged in light. Others had to be kept in the dark, with a dog standing guard and a man ready to burn the forest down if that's what it took to keep a child breathing. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, and snow began to fall again, quiet, relentless, hiding every footprint a little deeper beneath its pale, merciless silence. The house was wrapped in silence, the kind that presses against your ears like cotton, too thick, too unnatural. Outside, the forest whispered its midnight secrets, branches shifting in the wind, a distant owl punctuating the dark with its mournful cry. Walter stirred on the couch, the soft, static hum of an old radio beside him. He hadn't planned to fall asleep there, but he'd stayed up late again, combing through zoning records, redacted PDFs, and half-buried contractor names, trying to find something that made the puzzle make sense. Barron lay across the room, ears up, body still as stone, the kind of stillness that comes just before instinct takes over. Then came the sound, a soft thump, then another. Barron's ears twitched, his eyes snapped to the stairs. The sound wasn't loud, barely above the creak of old floorboards settling, but it was rhythmic. Footsteps, small ones, bare. Walter's eyes opened just as Barron stood. The German shepherd gave a sharp bark knot, aggressive but alert, a warning. Walter bolted upright, heart already in his throat. He saw Theo. The boy was halfway down the stairs, but he wasn't awake. His little body moved like a puppet, slow, mechanical, arms loose at his sides. His eyes were wide open but glassy, unseeing. And he was whispering. Walter rushed to him, but stopped cold at the words spilling from Theo's lips. "I'm next! I'm next! He's coming through the wall!" Barron let out a low, trembling growl and stood beside the staircase, body tense, tail rigid. Walter took the steps, 2 at a time. "Theo," he said gently, not wanting to jolt him. "Hey, buddy, it's okay. I'm here." But Theo didn't stop. He turned away from Walter, still asleep, and walked through the front door. It hadn't even been locked. Walter followed, barefoot on cold porch wood, the night air biting at his skin. Barron darted ahead, blocking Theo's path, as the boy started walking down the front steps, headed straight toward the tree line. Straight toward the dark. Theo's whispers grew more frantic. "I saw him. He was looking at me, inside the wall. His hands, they came out. They reached. Walter reached him just in time. He scooped Theo into his arms, heart pounding. "You're safe. You're safe. It's okay." He kept repeating it like a prayer, like if he said it enough, the truth would bend around the words. Theo shook violently. Though still asleep, tears ran down his face. Barron circled them both, eyes locked on the woods. The dog didn't bark again. He just stood there, breathing heavy, watching something that Walter couldn't see. Walter carried Theo back into the house, his muscles straining not from the weight of the boy, but from the weight of everything else. The fear, the questions, the sense that whatever this was, it was getting closer. He tucked Theo onto the couch and wrapped him in a blanket. The boy whimpered, his small fingers gripping Walter's shirt in his sleep. "I'm here," Walter whispered, voice cracking. "I'm not going anywhere." Barron settled beside them, curling protectively against Theo's legs. His eyes didn't close. Not even once. For a long time, Walter didn't move. He just sat there, one hand on his grandson's back, the other resting on Barron's thick fur, feeling the steady pulse beneath it. Eventually, Theo calmed. But Walter didn't. His thoughts were racing. "He's coming through the wall." It was the second time Theo had said that phrase. Once while awake. Once during this episode. Was it sleepwalking? A night terror? PTSD? Or was it something more literal? Walter's eyes drifted toward the hallway, the one that led to Theo's room, and the vent. And then he remembered something Theo had said a few days earlier. "I don't like the voices in the wall." Walter's stomach turned. He'd dismissed it at the time. Called it imagination. Childhood fear. But what if it wasn't? What if someone had been using the vents to talk to Theo? What if that camera wasn't the only one? He looked at Barron, who was still watching the hallway, still growling softly under his breath. Something was in this house, and Theo had seen it felt-eyed in the dark. Walter rose slowly and locked the front door this time, deadbolt and chain. Then he grabbed his flashlight and walked toward Theo's room, every step heavier than the last. He got to the closet, knelt, ran his hand along the vent. No sound, no movement. But something felt wrong. The metal was cool, almost too cool, as if air had been circulating even though the system hadn't kicked on in hours. Walter's pulse jumped. He opened the vent cover and peered inside. Nothing. But a faint scent hit him, a sour, chemical smell he couldn't place. Not mold, not rot, something sharper. He took a deep breath, then stood and shut the closet door. When he turned around, Barron was sitting in the hallway, eyes never leaving the door. He gave one short bark, then silence again. Walter knelt beside him. "You knew, didn't you?" he whispered. "You always knew." Barron licked his hand once. And, for the first time in years, Walter felt like crying. Not just from fear, but from the weight of knowing he hadn't protected the one person who needed him most. Not in time. Not yet. But he would now. No matter what was behind those walls, no matter who had been watching, no matter how deep this thing went, he would find it and stop it. Night poured over Redwood Hollow like ink, erasing every line that separated town from forest. Only the courthouse clock dared speak, its lonely chime marking 11 as Walter Granger slipped from the shadows of a frozen alley and studied the rear of the Municipal Records Building. 2 stories of red brick, 1 dim security light. And as he'd learned during his days on the planning board, an aging fire exit, whose alarm had never been rewired after the last budget cuts. Old war instinct stirred. He checked the street once more. Empty. Barron waited behind the hardware store's dumpster, leash looped loosely through a broken cinder block. The dog's ears were forward, eyes locked on Walter. "Stay. Guard." Walter raised 2 finger-silent code from decades past stand. Barron settled, the faintest whine slipping between his teeth. Then Walter was moving, feet soft in the snow, breath pluming white as he reached the steel door. A quick twist of a flathead between frame and latch. A practiced pop-no, louder than a twig snapping, and the lock surrendered. Inside, the hallway smelled of stale paper and mothballs. Fluorescent bulbs hummed overhead, casting the kind of cold light that made rooms feel abandoned even when they weren't. Walter listened. No footsteps, no cough from the night janitor, no police radio crackle. Good. He headed for the records office back corner, past the bulletin board layered in lost cat notices and church potlucks. The door there had a beefier lock. He knelt, rolled a tension wrench and rake between gloved fingers, and let muscle memory guide him. Click. 7 pins. He felt each one lift like a breath held too long. Click. He eased the door open. Dust floated in the beam of his flashlight, glittering like secrets. Rows of filing cabinets lined both walls, regimented as soldiers. Above them, shelves sagged under decades of bound permits and county seal ledgers. He'd been here before legally when he first bought the cabin. But that was daylight, with a clerk's nervous chatter filling the silence. Tonight, only his pulse. Walter shut the door, wedged a chair under the knob, and crossed to the permit index computer, a relic with a humming hard drive and a password any half-awake clerk could guess. Hollow 123. He slipped a flash drive into the port, then typed Everwell into the contractor search bar. No matches. Of course, whoever was behind the shell company had scrubbed their name from the public database. Old instincts kicked harder. Look for patterns, not names. He filtered by HVAC maintenance and miscellaneous structural repair, the umbrella phrases that Everwell had used on his own house. 97 results over 6 years. He sorted by street. His pulse spiked. Emily Carver's address. Last year, attic ventilation reinforcement. The Wilkes house. Basement humidity solution. The Miller property. Wall cavity insulation retrofit. All within a 10-mile radius. Every home with children under 10. Walter's hands tightened on the mouse. He exported the list to his flash drive, but something nagged at him on itch between his shoulder blades he'd felt in ambush country right before bullets found air. Paper trail, he reminded himself. Digital files can disappear. He moved to the filing cabinets, yanking drawers until he found the physical copies. Manila folders, handwritten notes, contractor signatures that looked almost too identical. He snapped photos of each page with his phone. Then he flipped to the back's inspection sign-offs that bore the same looping initials, DS, every single one. A floorboard creaked in the hall. Walter froze, blood roaring in his ears. Another creak closer. He clicked off the flashlight and crouched behind a cabinet, letting the dark swallow him. Footsteps paused outside the office door. A key slid into the lock. Chairs wedged, Walter thought. By seconds. A rattle. A muttered curse. Walter's gaze flicked to the high window near the ceiling-wired glass, half-painted shut but large enough. He grabbed the sill, hoisted himself silently, and pushed. The paint cracked. The pane groaned, but it shifted. Another shove. It opened just enough. He pulled himself through, shoulders brushing flaking paint, and landed in the narrow alley behind the building. The door inside finally gave. Light spilled across the floor where he'd stood moments before. A voice barked, "Hello? Anyone in here?" Walter melted into the dark, pressing against the brick until the flashlight beam moved past the window. He exhaled through his nose, slow and quiet, and slipped down the alley toward Barron. The shepherd met him with a low chuff question. Relief, urgency, all in one. Walter knelt, unlooped the leash, and scratched between the dog's ears. "Good boy. Time to go." "Aye." They moved together along the back streets, footprints swallowed almost immediately by fresh snow. The town clock tolled midnight. In Walter's pocket, the flash drive felt heavier than lead. Children's homes targeted, falsified permits, the same initials on every inspection DS. Who was he? How deep did this go? Walter pictured Theo sleepwalking toward the forest, whispering, "I'm next." He quickened his pace. War had taught him many things: that evil didn't always wear a uniform, that monsters liked dark corners, that the only way to beat fear was to drag it into the light. Tonight, Redwood Hollow's darkness felt familiar, and Walter Granger was done waiting for permission to fight back. Dawn broke in a thin, blood-orange line above the pines, but Walter Granger hadn't slept to see it. He sat at the kitchen table, laptop glowing against a sea of paper, copies of work orders, inspection tags, and the list he'd lifted from the town archives. Coffee steamed untouched at his elbow. Barron paced a slow perimeter around the room, nose to window ever the silent sentry. Walter highlighted the 6th address on his spreadsheet and frowned. All 6 homes had 2 things in common. Eins, Children under 10. R. A maintenance visit in the last 5 years from Everwell Solutions LLC, the Shell, with no phone, no website, no crew photos. He clicked open a social media profile he'd found for Laura Wilkes, mother of 2. Her most recent post 3 months old showed tired eyes and a caption that punched Walter in the gut. Another sleepless night. Owen swears someone whispers under his floor. Doc says night terrors. But why does he wake at the same time 3:17 a.m. every night? Walter scrolled farther. A comment beneath the post chilled him. Tammy Carver. Emily went through that last year. It stopped after we changed all the locks, but she still won't sleep without the closet light on. Emily. Missing Emily. Walter leaned back, throat tight. He opened the next file. The Millers on Cross Ridge Road. Police report. 2 years old and attempted break-in. Front lock jimmied. Dog barking at the vents. The husband had written a statement claiming he saw a glint of red light behind the furnace ductwork days before. A glint like a camera lens, Walter thought. He laid out the addresses on a printed map, pinned with push tacks, lines of red yarn stretching between them. The pattern looked like a slow-growing rash across the county, each tack a household with a frightened child, all radiating from a single dirt access road that cut through federal timberland. An artery. Easy in, easy out. Hidden. Theo padded into the kitchen, hair askew, pajamas rumpled. Barron softened instantly, pressing his head into the boy's hand. Theo scratched behind the dog's ear, but his eyes were heavy, haunted. Didn't dream, he whispered, almost surprised. Walter forced a smile. That's good news, bud. Theo's gaze drifted to the map. Those are houses, aren't they? Yeah. Like ours? Walter hesitated, then nodded. No use shielding him from truth anymore. Theo traced a finger between 2 tacks. Why are they all connected? Because someone visited every one of them, Walter said. Pretended to fix things. Probably installed cameras, maybe more. Theo's shoulders hunched. Like the one in my closet. Exactly like that. Barron let out a low woof, as if seconding the conclusion. Walter rubbed the dog's neck. We're going for a drive. Laura Wilkes answered the door with a toddler on her hip and worry etched into skin that looked 6 months short on sleep. Walter flashed the retired military badge the mayor had once given him for veteran outreach, a token that still opened doors. I know this is odd, he said, but I'm investigating a contractor who did work on your house. He handed over the Everwell copy. Did they service your vents last year? Laura squinted, then her face drained. Yes. They said the attic needed a humidity barrier. Why? Since then, your sons had night terrors? Her lips trembled. Every night. Walter asked permission, crawled into the attic with Barron at his heels, and began checking ducts. It took 10 minutes to find the camera-same black cube, same red diode edged behind insulation, angled toward the boy's bed. Laura sobbed downstairs when Walter placed the device in her palm. How long was he on that thing? Walter didn't answer. He couldn't. Deputy Marla Ridge arrived just as Walter and Barron pried open a vent cover on the rear exterior wall. Another camera. Another red blink. The deputy's face went gray. Sheriff's gonna call this evidence tampering, she warned. Let him, Walter replied. Your loose wire theory yet? Marla looked at Emily's swing-set police tape, fluttered in the wind, then swallowed. What do you need? Search warrants, Walter said. For every address on this map. He handed her the list. And I need them tonight. She stared at the paper. That's half the township. Then start with Emily's house. We're running out of time. Marla pocketed the list, eyes fierce now. I'll push it through. Theo sat at the table, coloring quietly, while Barron rested at his feet. Walter added new pins to the map green, this time for each camera found. 6 homes so far, 6 cameras removed. The pattern wasn't random. It was meticulous. Someone had mapped these families, measured vent lengths, studied children's routines, and every maintenance visit lined up with a spike in night terrors and whispered voices. Walter's phone buzzed Marla again. Got partial plate matches from neighbors' door cams, she said. Black van, no logos. Same one seen near Wilkes and Carver houses on their work dates. Run it, Walter said. It's registered to Cairnbridge Logistics, she replied. Matches the holding firm your friend flagged. Walter gripped the phone. We've got our link. He hung up and exhaled shakily. Barron lifted his head listening. "Grandpa," Theo said, voice small. "Are they coming here again?" Walter kneeled beside him, looked into those frightened eyes. "Not if I can help it." He glanced at the mabtacks, yarn, a spiderweb of hidden corridors. But webs weren't just lines. They were traps. And Walter wasn't prey. Not anymore. Old war instincts thrummed in his blood like drums before a charge. He stroked Barron's fur once, then reached for his coat and the shotgun leaning by the door. "Stay inside," he told Theo. "Keep the radio on police band. If anything changes, you call Marla. And you call me." "Where are you going?" Walter opened the door, cold wind slapping his face. "To cut the spider out of its own web." Barron stepped forward, tail sweeping low, ready. "Let's hunt," Walter muttered, and the shepherd's eyes gleamed. The pattern had emerged. Now it was time to break it. Walter's battered Ford rolled onto Maple Street just after dusk, headlights sweeping over tidy yards and deer-print snowdrifts. He'd spent the afternoon knocking on doors. Wilkes, Carver, Miller families, who now understood the threat because he'd placed a black camera cube in each trembling hand. But those were the easy ones. Tonight he needed the rest of Redwood Hollow to wake up, and that meant facing the town meeting at St. Luke's Fellowship Hall. The parking lot was full potluck night, and the warm spill of lamplight felt almost obscene after the day he'd had. Walter strode inside, Barron at his heel, and climbed the low stage without asking permission. Conversations broke mid-sentence. Plastic forks froze over casserole plates. Theo's second-grade teacher, Mrs. Denton, squinted at the veteran and whispered something to Pastor Malloy, who frowned politely. Walter held up the Everwell file and the county map peppered with pins. "Every red tack is a house with hidden cameras aimed at kids' bedrooms," he said, voice carrying in the high-ceilinged hall. "Every green tack is a child who's had night terrors, heard whispers, or tried to sleepwalk into the woods. Emily Carver is missing because someone crawled through her vents and took her. If your house has an Everwell permit, check your walls tonight." A nervous chuckle rippled through the crowd, followed by awkward silence. Howard Kurth, hardware store owner, whose laugh always sounded like an idling truck, raised a hand. "Walt, you been watching too many spy shows? Ain't nobody tunneling through sheetrock to kidnap kids. That little Carver girl probably wandered off. Search parties'll find her." "It's 30 degrees and dropping," Walter growled. "You think an 8-year-old lasted 3 nights in that?" He tossed a camera onto the podium. It skidded, blinking red. Gasps fluttered like startled birds. "Pulled this from Owen Wilkes' attic. Infrared lens, live transmitter. The man who installed it logged your children like data points." Malloy stepped forward, palms out. "Now, Walter, let's not frighten everyone until the sheriff confirms." "The sheriff's been stalling!" Walter slammed a fist, plates rattled. "We report cameras. They call it faulty wiring. We spot footprints. They say a drifter." "How many red tacks before you call it what it is, organized hunting?" Maurice Mers swelled, some angry, some mocking. Old Joe Byers snorted. "Always thought war messed his head." A woman near the pie table whispered. Poor Theo Magin, growing up with that paranoia. Walter scanned the faces, his pulse thudding. He saw disbelief, pity, annoyance, anything but preparedness. Barron sensed the shift. His hackles rose and a deep growl vibrated through the floorboards. Malloy flinched. Howard Kerr pointed. "See? Even the dog's spooked by his own master." Walter's breath fogged in the chilly hall as he fought an urge he hadn't felt since combatant urge to grab people by the shoulders and shake the sleep out of them. Instead, he spoke low. "When the next child disappears, remember tonight. Remember you had a chance to bar your vents, to keep a loaded shotgun by the bed, and you chose potluck laughter. He gathered his map, snapped his fingers for Barron, and walked out to a silence, thick with uneaten words. Snow fell heavier on the drive home, flakes swirling in the headlights like restless ghosts. Walter clenched the wheel, jaw tight, replaying every dismissive smirk. Behind him, Barron panted softly, restless. They turned onto the gravel lane leading to the cabin. The trees loomed, branches skeletal in the moonlight, as if waiting for something to crack. Inside, Theo sat on the couch hugging his stuffed raccoon, eyes shining with fear he hadn't voiced since his parents died. He sprang up when Walter entered. "Did they believe you?" he asked. Hope and dread nodded together. Number. Walter set the paperwork on the table with a dull slap. They think I'm seeing ghosts. Theo's shoulders dropped. Grandpa, don't go back to the police. If they laugh at you, he'll know. The man in the walls hears everything. Walter knelt so their eyes met. I have to keep pushing. Emily's out there. Theo gripped Walter's hands, knuckles white. Please, he said, I'm next. Walter's heart cracked. He pulled Theo into a fierce hug, smelling wood smoke and fear in the boy's hair. I won't let anyone take you. Baron pressed against them, issuing a low whine, then turned and trotted down the hallway, nose skimming baseboards, tail rigid. Walter watched him disappear into Theo's room and exhale a soft chuff, the all clear that never really sounded clear anymore. They ate a silent supper grilled cheese. Theo barely nibbled them. Walter bolted the doors, wedged dining chairs under each knob, and jammed screwdrivers into every ground floor window track. Upstairs, he dragged Theo's mattress into the hallway outside Walter's door. Theo curled under blankets while Baron stretched full length beside him, spine to the boy's back, breath warming the quilt. Hours passed. Walter lay awake on his own mattress, shotgun across his chest, listening to the metronome of Baron's breathing. Each rise and fall matched Theo's. The dog adjusted whenever the child shifted, a living wall between innocence and whatever roamed the vents. Near 3 a.m., a floorboard popped. Baron's head shot up, ears pricked. Theo whimpered in his sleep, murmuring words Walter couldn't catch. The old shepherd let out a warning, growl, quiet, lethal. But nothing followed. No scratching, no whisper. Just the settling house and wind sighing against cedar. Walter released a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. He rested a hand on Baron's side, feeling the muscles taut beneath fur, ready to detonate at the slightest sound. In the dark, Walter muttered, "Good boy," anchoring himself to the only ally who never doubted. Outside, the storm thickened, erasing tire tracks, muffling the world in white. Somewhere beyond those trees, a black van might idle, waiting. Somewhere, a lens might flicker to life. But here, under one patched roof, a veteran, a child, and a war-scarred dog held their vigil, a tiny fortress of conviction against a town too sleepy to see its own nightmare. Walter closed his eyes not to sleep, but to listen harder. The next move would be his, and this time he wouldn't ask permission. Snow hissed against the cabin windows, the storm swallowing moonlight in slow, hungry gulps. Inside, the only glow came from Walter's oil lamp on the kitchen counter-thin, flickering, fragile. He'd cut the main lights hours earlier to keep the house dim, a precaution he couldn't fully explain to Theo, only enforce. No bright targets, no silhouettes in the glass. Theo slept on a makeshift bed of quilts in the hallway, a flashlight and Walter's CB radio resting beside him. Baron lay stretched across the boy's feet, chest rising and falling in a measured rhythm that almost calmed Walter's nerves. Almost. Walter himself sat in the rocker facing the back door, shotgun balanced across his lap, half listening to the wind howl down the chimney, half remembering patrol nights in the jungle, mosquitoes gnawing, nerves razor thin, waiting for the inevitable crack of brush. At 2:14 a.m., everything died. The lamp sputtered once, then went black. The fridge's low hum stopped mid-note. Even the clock on the wall silenced its steady tick. The storm hadn't tripped a line Walter would have heard the distant transformer pop. No, this failure was local. Targeted. Baron lifted his head, hackles already spiking. A deep growl formed in his chest, rumbling through the dark like distant artillery. Theo stirred. "Grandpa? Stay down," Walter whispered. He slid from the rocker, racked to shelve the metallic clack slicing through the dark, and let muscle memory guide his steps to the hall. He knelt, hand on Theo's shoulder. "Remember the drill." Theo's voice shook. "Quiet as the field." "Good." Walter pressed the flashlight into his palm. "Only if I say—" Then it came. A soft crunch outside the kitchen footfalls in deep snow. Careful, but not careful enough for a trained ear. Baron snarled, the sound raw, feral, nothing like the disciplined guardian Walter knew. The shepherd lunged to the back door, claws skittering across the wood. A shadow flickered past the frosted window pane. Handle metal squeaked. Jiggle. Pause. Jiggle again harder. Whoever it was knew the power was out. Probably assumed the residents were cowering upstairs, phone lines dead. Walter moved beside the doorframe, barrel angled toward the knob. Another jolt, this one purposeful. Barron exploded, barking so violently the narrow hallway vibrated. Theo clapped both hands over his ears but stayed crouched, obedient. Outside, a low voice cursed too, muffled to catch words. Then hurried footsteps retreating across the porch. Walter risked a quick glance through the side window. 2 figures, dark coats, hoods up, slogging toward the tree line. One paused. Turning back, the porch light caught a glint of red on his sleeve, a patch or logo Walter couldn't identify before the figure vanished behind snow-laden spruce. Walter yanked open the back door and leveled the shotgun at the night. "Stop!" The wind stole the command, tossing it into the storm. Only swirling flakes answered. He could chase part of him twitch to follow, but Theo was inside, exposed. He slammed the door and threw the deadbolt. Barron was still snarling, nose to the bottom of the door, tail rigid. Walter knelt, gripping the dog's scruff, whispering steady praise until the growls turned into tense whines. Theo crawled closer, flashlight off but fists wide around it. Did they leave? For now, Walter led them both to the living room, set Theo behind the couch, and dragged the heavy oak armoire across the back entrance. The storm masked most noise. Still, he worked fast, adrenaline thinning, the cold biting his fingers. "Power's cut," he muttered, half to Barron, half to himself. "Generator stays off too loud." He checked the front windows. No movement on the lane, but tire tracks carved fresh grooves in the snowbank, angling toward town. Not a random prowler then. Someone coordinated. Someone with partners. Theo's whisper trembled. "You said they'd try again." Walter looked at him. The boy's eyes were wide, frightened but steady. "And we're ready." He handed Theo the CB mic. "Remember the channel?" 11, Theo said. "Deputy Marla. Only if they get inside, understood?" Theo nodded. Barron moved to the hall vent, growled low, then returned to Theo's side, pressing against him so forcefully the child nearly toppled. Walter felt a swell of gratitude so fierce it hurt. The dog was a wall of muscle and loyalty, and right now that wall was the thin red line between an 8-year-old and whatever nightmare prowled the woods. A sudden clatter outside the garbage can knocked over. Walter spun toward the kitchen, sighting down the barrel. Barron charged ahead, halted at the window, barked once. Walter ducked under the sill, peered through the lower pane. Nothing but snow dancing in the porch light's faint halo. Yet something had been out there, testing. Minutes crawled past. No more shadows, no more footsteps. Just the storm and the oppressive dark of a powerless cabin. Walter finally eased the hammer on the shotgun, but he didn't lower it. Theo's whisper floated from behind the couch. "Why us?" Walter exhaled. "Because we saw them." Barron settled beside the boy, head on Theo's lap, ears pivoting at every creak. Theo stroked the dog's fur, small fingers trembling but determined, and whispered to him like a secret prayer. Walter sat with his back to the door, shotgun across his knees, eyes on the vent that led to unseen passageways. Every few seconds he glanced at the dark window, waiting for the next test, the next jolt, the next jiggle of metal that meant the hunters hadn't gone far. Outside, deep in the tree line, a sliver of flashlight winked out, as though someone had lifted a hand to mask the glow. Walter saw it. Barron saw it. Both tensed, but the light didn't return. A game of patience, Walter realized. They hadn't failed. They'd only measured the cabin's defenses, and they would come again, maybe in an hour, maybe in a day more prepared. Walter's muscles ached with the terrible weight of anticipation. He listened to the wind rattle, shingles loose, and tried not to imagine Emily Carver alone in the dark wherever they held her. Tried not to imagine Theo's voice joining hers. He would not let that happen. As the night dragged toward dawn, Walter kept vigil. Barron didn't sleep, pressed tight against Theo, rumbling at every stray noise. And Theo, caught between dog and grandfather, stared into the dim room, eyes refusing to close until the sky threatened gray. The power might return with sunrise, Walter thought, but the real blackout had already begun. The town didn't believe him. The sheriff was behind the curve, and unseen men now knew exactly which lock to pick, which vent to crawl, which child to claim. Walter clutched the shotgun stock until his knuckles blanched and whispered into the dark, "Try again." No answer. came only the hush of snow, burying tracks that promised to be back. Snow still drifted in ragged sheets across the yard when a sharp, metallic clink jolted Walter out of his half-daze. He'd propped himself against the living room wall, shotgun upright between his knees, eyelids hovering somewhere between exhaustion and vigilance. Barron had been pacing the hallway, nails clicking an anxious metronome against the floorboards, while Theo dozed on the couch, red-rimmed eyes fluttering beneath feverish dreams. Clink again. Lower. Backdoor latch height. Barron froze mid-stride, ears slicing the air. A rumble built in his chest, deep enough to shake the wooden planks. Walter rose without a breath of sound, edging to the kitchen doorway. Through the window above the sink, he saw nothing but swirling white. Then the knob turned. It rotated no more than an inch, just enough for the intruder to test the deadbolt Walter had set. The metal thunked quietly and stopped. From the other side came the scrape of tools, deliberate and quick. Whoever it was, they worked with the confidence of someone who'd practiced on locks, just like this. Walter pressed his back to the wall, heart thundering in his ears. Barron stalked forward, lips peeled, a thread of saliva stretching from fang to gum. Theo stirred behind them, sensing the change in air-sensing fear. The tumblers clicked into false alignment. The prowler cursed under his breath. Another attempt, a softer snick. The lock gave. The door eased inward 5 inches, just enough for a gloved hand to snake through. Moonlight caught black fabric and the dull sheen of a pry bar. Walter leveled the shotgun, finger tense on the trigger. But Barron moved first. He launched like a fired shell, one explosive bark tearing the night apart. The door flung wide as 95 pounds of canine fury slammed into it. Walter caught a flash of a masked face, dark eyes widening before the shepherd's jaws clamped around that intruding arm. A scream ripped through the storm as bone met teeth. The man staggered back, yanking wildly. Barron held on, front paws churning snow, dragging the assailant off the porch. Blood sprayed across white drifts, stark crimson against ghostly moonlight. Walter burst past the threshold, shotgun raised, but Barron's savage efficiency left no safe shot. The man punched, kicked, howled. The dog only tightened. A second figure materialized from the tree linea, partner sprinting toward the brawl. Walter fired once into the air. Boom! The runner skidded, ducked behind a pine, then bolted into darkness. The first intruder, arm shredding in Barron's jaws, jabbed a boot at the dog's ribcage. Barron grunted but didn't release. "Barron, out!" Walter barked. Training cut through blood haze. Barron dropped the arm and bounded backward, positioning himself between Walter and the attacker. The man clutched his forearm glove in tatters, blood soaking through, and stumbled after his partner, leaving a ragged red trail into the woods. Within seconds, storm and night had swallowed both. Barron wanted to chase, muscles quivering, eyes aflame, but Walter snapped, "Stay!" and keyed the radio clipped to his belt. "Unit 4, this is Granger, shots fired. Suspect wounded. Flee North Ridge behind Old Mill Road. Code red. Require immediate response and EMT." He rattled off coordinates, voice steady though his hands trembled. Static crackled. Deputy Marla's voice cut in. "Copy, Walt. Units en route. Do not pursue. Hold position. Secure the boy." Walter exhaled, lungs burning. He knelt in the churned snow, pressed a hand to Barron's fur. "Good boy," he breathed, adrenaline shaking every word. Behind them, Theo's scream shredded the silence that remained. The child stood in the doorway, bare feet on cold wood, tears carving rivers down his cheeks. "Grandpa." Walter hurried inside. Barron followed, blood speckling his muzzle. Theo collapsed against the dog, sobbing into thick coat. "He tried to take you," Walter whispered, pulling a blanket around the boy's shoulders. Barron stopped him. Theo's fingers tangled in fur, knuckles white. Barron licked his face once, soft, as if apologizing for the terror his duty required. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance. Growing louder, Walter slid the deadbolt back into places splintered, but holding then braced a chair under the knob. He set the shotgun on the counter, hands finally free to shake. Out the window, he watched red droplets, already half buried by new snow. Evidence disappearing with every gust. He steadied himself, stroked Barron's head, and whispered a promise to them both. "They bled on our land tonight. Next time they won't walk away." Outside, The blue-white spin of patrol lights crested the hill, slicing through storm and shadow. Walter held Theo tighter, felt Barron's heartbeat slow beneath his palm, and waited for the cavalry that had come just minutes late and, he feared, miles behind. Blue strobes pulsed across the snow-packed yard, glazing tree trunks in alternating sapphire and midnight. Deputy Marla Ridge was first through the door, weapon drawn but lowered when she saw Walter, shotgun resting against the counter, and Barron sitting command post rigid beside Theo. Behind her strode Sheriff Nolan, face washed pale by cruiser lights, jaw clenched tight as a winter knot. Walter said nothing, only pointed to the back door where splinters fanned like feathers and a dark smear of blood led over the threshold into the churned drifts. Marla followed it with the beam of her maglite. "God," she whispered, "you weren't kidding." Nolan holstered his sidearm, eyes flicking from the broken lock to Barron's stained muzzle. "Dog bite?" he asked quietly. "Left forearm," Walter answered. "Suspect fled north with a partner. Tire tracks on Old Mill Road if snow hasn't buried them." Theo, still wrapped in the blanket, clung to Barron's neck. The shepherd kept his head high, eyes trained on every stranger in the room but making no move yet. An EMT knelt to check the boy, but Theo shook his head and buried his face deeper into fur. Nolan stepped closer to Barron, hand extended for permission. Walter snapped, "Don't crowd him. He's working." The sheriff withdrew, nodding. "Animal control's on the way for bite impressions," he said. "State crime scene techs 10 minutes behind." Walter crossed his arms. "Better bring evidence bags big enough." He opened a drawer, produced a zip-tied Parself vent camera that had launched this war. "Pulled 4 more just like it from neighboring homes today. You'll find serial numbers hacked off, but boards inside should trace manufacturing. My guess? Same batch used in overseas Black Ops surveillance." Nolan accepted the package as though it were radioactive. "Why didn't you turn these in earlier?" "I did," Walter said, voice flat. "Your deputies logged them as electrical debris." He gestured to Marla, whose cheeks colored. "Sir," she murmured. "I tried." Nolan pinched the bridge of his nose. "All right, mistakes made, but tonight changes things." He eyed Barron again. "We'll need to photograph his teeth, match pattern to the wound." "Fine," Walter said. "But he stays with Theo. You do it here or nowhere." The sheriff hesitated, then motioned the crime scene photographer forward. Barron allowed the stranger within arm's reach only after Walter's quiet command. A plastic dental strip pressed briefly against canines. Flashbulbs ignited, leaving spots in Walter's vision. Barron didn't flinch. Professional, like the soldier he'd been born to be. Marla returned from the porch, holding a crimson-spattered scrap of black fabric. "Glove piece. Still wet." She sealed it in evidence. "We'll DNA this." Walter unfolded a county map on the table. "Every attack site lines up along this service road, leading to Cairn Bridge's storage yard." He jabbed a finger at the dead-end spur beyond Timber Company land. "Unincorporated. Low patrol frequency. Bet you'll find the van there maybe, more kids like Emily." Nolan studied the Pinsrid for cameras. Yellow for night terrors, green for last night's attempted assault. The pattern formed a horseshoe around that yard. "I'll call state police for a warrant," he said. Walter's stare hardened. "Call whoever you want, but go tonight. They're moving." The men who hit us were recontesting response time. Nolan's radio crackled. "Car. 2 at Ridgeline, found fresh blood trail, negative on suspects. Visibility, low." Another unit chimed in tire tracks lost to blowing snow. The sheriff thumbed transmit. "Hold perimeter. Track with dogs at first light." He clipped the radio back, meeting Walter's eyes. "We'll move fast, but we follow procedure." "Procedure got Emily taken," Walter growled. "Procedure keeps juries from cutting these bastards loose on technicality." Nolan's voice was calm but steely. The weight of elected responsibility sat heavy on his shoulders tonight. Walter exhaled. A thin white ribbon. "Then at least post a cruiser here. If they fail at the vents, they'll come through the woods again." He glanced at Theo, who peeked out from Barron's fur with red-rimmed eyes. "You have my word," Nolan said. He signaled 2 deputies. "Perimeter guard. No lights, no sirens. Anyone approaches this property unannounced, you challenge first, shoot second." Walter tightened his jaw. It was something, but the math in his head still didn't balance. Cameras in vents, shell companies, Federal contractors. The operation smelled bigger than two masked thugs skulking in snow. Why risk an assault after losing equipment? Why not cut losses and vanish? Unless they needed something else from this house, something still hidden. State investigators arrived, lugging silver cases. They photographed blood, prints, door damage. They asked for the camera. Walter handed it over but kept its twin lens he'd unscrewed early-era failsafe. Always leave them guessing what you still know. An EMT tried again to coax Theo for vitals. Barron bristled, but a soft murmur from Theo calmed him. The boy finally allowed a stethoscope, all while gripping a tuft of sable fur. Hours passed in fluorescent bursts of activity until the living room looked less like a home and more like a crime lab. When the last flash fired and bag sealed, silence crept back in. Thick and exhausted, Nolan paused at the doorway. "We'll pull the permit logs on Everwell, cross-reference Cairnbridge. First light, bring shovels," Walter said. "You'll be digging children out of snowdrifts if you wait." The sheriff's face tightened, but he nodded. "Stay armed, Walt." Then he was gone, taillights dissolving into snowfall. Walter bolted the door behind him. The house felt emptier for all the people who just left. Evidence packed away, but answers still missing. Theo sat on the couch, eyes glossy but awake. "They'll come back," he whispered. Walter knelt, muscles aching. "Not if I see them first." He looked to Barron, who pressed even closer to the boy, chest rumbling with a promise older than words. Outside, the storm eased to a hush. In that fragile lull before dawn, Walter sensed the same Rongnasan equation unresolved. Something still didn't add up, and whatever piece he hadn't found yet was already sliding into place, somewhere out in the dark, readying the next move. Dawn broke over the county line as convoy lights sliced through the fog. Sheriff Nolan led the way to an abandoned storage complex called in by a trucker who heard banging from inside Unit 47. The site matched a red pin on Walter's map. Though not invited, Walter followed in his Ford, Barron beside him. Something told him this drive would change everything. They arrived as the first light brushed over frost-lined doors. A muffled thump came from one unit weak and hurried, like a heartbeat running out. "Cut it!" Nolan ordered. The door clanged open. Inside, a little girl crouched in a torn parka, zip-tied, cheeks filthy Emily Carver. She flinched from light, whispering, "He heard the dog. He got scared." Her eyes landed on Barron. That bark dropped his phone and ran. Walter's heart pounded. Could it have been Barron's bark? Transmitted through hidden cameras? She said, "He said I was the last test." Then the dog barked in the walls, and he left. Deputies cut her restraints. She trembled until Barron approached and sniffed her shoes. "He saved me," she whispered. Walter replied gently, "You held on until we could find you, and me." Behind crates, Tex found a live router and a micro camera still recording. Someone had been watching. Nolan got a call. The black van had been torched 10 miles out. No prints. Tracks led to a drainage culvert. Walter muttered, "He's deeper now. Cover's blown." Barron growled at the wind. Emily reached out from the stretcher to touch his fur. "He saved me." Walter knew better. "You saved yourself." Back at the incident trailer, state techs picked apart the router. One of them, Salazar, called out, "Found a hidden partition. Encrypted schedule." Walter read the entries. The 28th of March 2025. Emelik complete. The 30th of March 2025. Theo, G, pending. The 1st of April 2025. Owen, W, pending. Walter froze. Theo's boy was next. Salazar dug deeper. Metadata showed GPS coordinates. Another tech flagged a remote admin user. GDS, maintenance. "Run it," Walter snapped. A DMV photo popped up. Thin man, patchy beard. Gavindale Sweeney, employed by Nikonek Kablanau, defunct. He'd kept the van, the badge, and access. Nolan radioed, "Suspect ID confirmed. Possibly wounded, armed, dangerous." Another flag appeared, login tied to ops manager from Cairnbridge Logistics. This wasn't just Sweeney. He had a planner. Walter's chest tightened. They missed their window with Emily. That puts Theo in danger. They'll retaliate. Nolan agreed. "We'll escort you. Roadblocks by dusk." "Too late," Walter said. "They'll move before daylight." Outside, snow drifted. As they neared the cabin, Marla radioed, Van shell torched. Trailer's gone. Witness saw U-Haul heading west. 3 a.m. driver nursing a wound. Walter's jaw clenched. He's circling back. When they reached the cabin, Theo ran to the porch. Walter hugged him tight. Bad men might come tonight, but we're ready. We have Baron. The dog stood firm, scanning the woods, a silent sentinel. That evening, a federal convoy rolled toward Cairnbridge Yard. Drones had scanned. 8 heat signatures in Building 3. Special Agent Peck led the breach. Flashbangs roared. Teams stormed the warehouse. Left aisle, crates with telecom gear fiber cables, microcams. Right aisle, shelves of children's clothes. Behind a wall of plywood, red standby lights glowed. Padlocks fell away. Inside, children. Zip-tied. Cold. Shaken. Walter moved room to room, helping EMTs calm them. One girl whispered, "I heard barking. Scared him away." That was Baron, Walter said softly. "He's watching over a friend tonight." In the final room, steel door, blood-smeared keypad, explosives cracked it open. Inside, space heater humming, cot empty, monitor bank running live feeds. One screen showed Walter's own hallway. Another showed Emily moments before rescue. A rear hatch scraped open. Agents dragged a man out, left arm bandaged. Parka stained with blood. Gavin Sweeney. "You ruined it," he hissed at Walter. "We were perfecting the process, no pain, no mess." Walter's voice dropped. "You called that perfection? You're lucky I made a promise to a boy." Another agent brought out ops manager, a heavy-set man in a soaked suit. His badge read Private Security. He said nothing. Forensics found blueprints, duct routes, zip cuffs. One folder bore Theo's photo, marked Today. Walter's stomach turned. Nolan joined him. "You were right." "No," Walter said. "I was late, but we got them home." "Oh." As ambulances drove away, Agent Peck handed over a drive. Encrypted drops. Overseas buyers. Walter stared at the kids being bundled into safety. "Let's watch them, not the screens." She nodded. "Good work, Sergeant. Couldn't have done it without my squad." Back at the cabin, the fire still burned. Baron kept watch. Theo stirred under blankets. Safe. Walter looked east, to where the sun rose. The list had been broken, the shadows undone, and the protector still stood. Baron held the line until afternoon, then collapsed. One moment he was patrolling the cabin's perimeter. The next, his hind legs buckled, and he went down beside the porch, crimson soaking into the snow. Walter dropped the shells he was carrying. "Baron!" He knelt, flannel shirt pressed against the wound. Blood pumped warm and fast. Theo ran from the house, eyes wide with fear. "No, no, no!" "Get towels!" Walter shouted. Theo returned moments later, arms full, hands shaking. They packed the cloth into the wound. Baron's eyes searched for Theo. His tail gave a weak thump. Walter lifted the dog's 95-pound body with strength born of fear. Sheriff Nolan's cruiser idled nearby. "Lights now!" Walter yelled. The siren wailed, and Baron was laid across the back seat. Theo curled beside him, whispering, "You're okay," over and over. 20 mountain miles later, they skidded into Pine Ridge Animal Hospital. "Name?" a tech asked. "Baron," Theo choked out. The gurney rolled away. Theo tried to follow, was gently stopped. "He needs surgery," a nurse said. Theo collapsed into a chair. Walter sat beside him, hands still stained. Time slowed. Ore doors swung open. Dr. Morris crouched to Theo's level. "He's still with us. We removed his spleen. Next 24 hours are critical." "Can I see him?" She nodded. Quiet and gentle, Baron lay beneath warm blankets, machines tracking fragile breath. Theo curled on the floor beside the gurney, fingers wrapped around Baron's paw. The dog's ear twitched. Walter lowered beside them. "He always fights," Theo whispered. "But not alone." Walter leaned in. "Stand down, soldier. Your watch is covered." Baron exhaled. The tail gave one flick. As night fell, Walter stayed. Theo slept with his head on Baron's side. Nurses brought blankets. Walter didn't move. Hours passed. Then silence grew heavy. Walter tried to hold it in. Decades of war, ghosts, guilt, but the dam cracked. A sob escaped. He buried his face in his hands and wept. Images poured through his mind. Baron lunging through snow, saving Theo, Emily whispering about a dog's bark, and deeper still comrades dying in distant jungles, a younger Walter screaming into static. "I'm sorry," he rasped. "God, I'm so damn sorry." He reached for Baron's other paw, opposite Theo's, and pressed it to his chest. "You carried everything I couldn't, and I still failed you." Baron didn't stir, but Theo did. Through half-closed eyes, he reached for Walter's hand. "I'm so sorry, kiddo," Theo whispered. "Baron doesn't blame you. I don't either." Walter laughed once, broken. "You should. You saved Emily. And the others." Walter looked at the machines. "Cost us this. He'd do it again," Theo said. "You both would." A monitor chimed stronger vitals. Baron let out a slow breath. Walter wiped his face. "No more failures. From here on, we finish the fight and we heal." Theo nodded. They stayed by Baron's side, hand in paw. At dawn, Baron's eyelids fluttered. Theo gasped. "Grandpa?" Walter leaned in. "Baron?" The dog's amber eyes opened. His tail gave a weak, decisive thump. Theo burst into tear-shappy ones. "You came back." Walter laid a hand on his side. "Welcome home, partner." Baron tried to shift. Pain stopped him, but his eyes never left Theo. "Doctor." Morris entered. "Well, look who ignored the odds." She checked vitals. "Tail wag counts as a good sign." Theo beamed. "He's magic." Walter exhaled with shaking relief. "Thank you." "It was all him," the doctor said. "And maybe the kid who wouldn't let go." Sunlight spilled through the window, landing on Baron's paws. The dog chuffed almost a laugh. Theo giggled. Walter memorized the moment. Boy, dog, light something unbreakable forged in fire and fear. Theo leaned into Walter. "He'll guard again, right?" Walter smiled. "He'll guard. But we guard him too. Team effort now." Baron's eyes flicked between them. Tail thumped. Footsteps neared. Sheriff Nolan stepped in, hat in hand. "Heard the big fella made it," he said. "He did," Theo said fiercely. The sheriff crouched, meeting Baron's gaze. "Thank you." Then to Walter. "Sweeney's in custody." The arm wound matched record. She bought surgical gear after torching the van. His boss cracked. "We tied them to multiple state cases." Walter kept his hand on Baron's back. "The kids?" "8 recovered. Families en route." Relief spread like warmth in winter. Theo leaned against the dog, eyes heavy. Walter stroked his hair. "Sleep, troop. First shift's over," Theo mumbled. Baron's shift never ends, before slipping into peaceful rest. Baron closed his eyes too, tail still against the boy's leg. Walter rested his forehead on the bed rail. He could finally breathe. There would be courtrooms, healing, memories, but for now, the tide had turned. A dog's heartbeat had returned. A child's laughter had too. Walter whispered, "Rest easy. The perimeter's secure." Sunlight climbed the walls, gold-warming sterile blue. Walter sat in it, one hand on fur, the other still holding Theo's, ready at last for what came next. By mid-April, Redwood Hollow traded its palette of grays for the wet, promising browns of thaw. Snowdrifts that once barricaded fences shrank into ragged islands, and the creek behind the Granger cabin, silent for months beneath ice, gurgled again like a throat clearing before song. Sap ran in the maples. Sunlight warmed south-facing walls. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, the air smelled of mud and possibility instead of gun, oil, and fear. Theo stood on the porch, book bag cinched tight, sneakers new and squeaking when he shifted. Beneath denim cuffs, the toes still bore Sharpie doodles he'd drawn while Baron recovered tiny shields, little swords, a crude paw print. Baron sat at his side, fur glossy where it had been shaved for surgery, ribs now filled out, a faint scar disappearing beneath the coat. The dog's posture was proud but relaxed, tail sweeping the boards in a rhythmic hush. Each breath he took came easy. Walter stepped out, coffee steaming in a cracked mug. He wore the VFW cap he'd dug from an old trunk. The brim felt foreign at first, but today it rested without weight. His Tuesdays were no longer spent pacing the porch. They belonged to a circle of folding chairs in the town library's basement, where other veterans spoke grief in halting sentences and nodded when he dared share. The first time Walter said, "I was scared," his voice trembled like frost-laden branches, but no one flinched. Now he went back week after week, letting silent years thaw the way snowmelt carved new rivers. Theo checked the time, nerves fluttering in his shoulders. "Bus'll be here any minute." Returning to school after everything felt steep as a mountain, the hallways might echo with questions he couldn't answer. Barron nudged the boy's elbow, as if to say, braver together. That morning, Dr. Morris had cleared the dog for full activity, so the plan was simple. No more waiting at the driveway. Barron would accompany Theo all the way to the bus stop at Pine Loop, a half-mile stroll through budding underbrush. Walter knelt to adjust the harness still emblazoned with Barron's canine patch. "Listen up, you two," he said, mock stern. "Dog keeps his eyes peeled. Kid keeps shoes tied." Theo saluted with exaggerated seriousness. "Yes, sir," Barron answered with a short woof, earning laughter from both. They started down the dirt lane. Puddles mirrored bright sky. Barron avoided them with practiced gait, while Theo stomped straight through, water lapping at rubber soles. Birds cast busy shadows overhead, stitching motion across the path. At the old birch split by winter storms, Theo paused, glancing back. Walter raised his mug in silent benediction. A new routine settled into place. Boy, dog, road, and the man watching, confident enough now to let them stride beyond sight. Back inside, Walter rinsed the cup and traded denim for a clean flannel group met in 2 hours. He grabbed the folder Dr. Coe had given him. Breathing exercises, grounding prompts, a scribbled reminder your guilt is not currency, stop paying with it. He'd scoffed at therapy once. Now he folded the sheet carefully into a pocket, talisman against old ghosts. On the walk to the truck, he noticed crocuses piercing last year's leaf-litter purple horns, trumpeting quiet triumph. He knelt, brushing soil from one bloom's delicate neck, marveling that something so soft could muscle through frozen earth. A lot like a boy's smile emerging after nightmare, or a dog's tail thumping once in recovery light. The support group convened in the basement's stale warmth. Fluorescent bulbs hummed. Metal chairs scraped. Frank Donovan, ex-Marine with a knee scar the size of Idaho, nodded as Walter entered. "Morning, Sergeant." Walter shook his hand. "Morning, Gunny." "Ugh." The session theme was re-entry. Walter spoke of picking Theo's lunch snacks, of trusting Barron to protect without sacrificing himself, of hearing creek water instead of gunfire at night. When his voice wavered, Frank passed a tissue box without comment. Walter didn't cry this time, but a tremor eased in his shoulders he hadn't known he carried. Afterward, he parked outside Mrs. Denton's elementary classroom, just as recess bells shrilled. Children burst onto the playground, bright as new pennies. Theo emerged from the throng, Barron trotting at heel, muzzle lifted to chase scents of living not hunting things. When the dog spotted Walter's truck, he broke formation for one jubilant sprint, ears flying. Theo followed, laughter peeling across asphalt. Walter opened the passenger door. Barron hopped in, tail drumming dashboard plastic. Theo climbed after, cheeks flushed. "He did it, Grandpa. Walked the whole way, didn't even limp." "And?" Walter ruffled the dog's neck. "Figured he would." He turned to the boy. "And you?" Theo shrugged a bashful joy. "Saturday with Lily at lunch. Talked about heroes." "Good talk?" Theo nodded firmly. "We agreed heroes get scared but keep protecting anyways." Walter swallowed, warmth swelling in his chest. "Smart conclusion." They drove home beneath a sky scrubbed clean. At the cabin, Theo kicked off shoes and raced Barron toward the unfrozen section of yard where tufts of grass dared green. Walter followed slower, noticing each sound: the squelch of earth, the creek's chatter, the distant hammer of a woodpecker. All ordinary, all miraculous. Barron found a stick, pranced to Theo, wagging a question. The boy threw. The dog bounded after, no hint of recent wounds, body arcing like a story's final flourish. When he returned, stick clenched triumphant, Theo wrapped arms around his neck. Barron's tail swept the ground, carving half moons in soft dirt. Walter leaned against the porch post. He closed his eyes, breathing lungfuls of thaw-scented air, listening to a child's laughter mingle with a shepherd's content grunt. The sounds knitted into something sturdier than silence ever was. Healing didn't roar, he realized. It dripped, melted, sprouted slow, but unstoppable. Spring had come to Redwood Hollow, and though memories would never vanish, they now shared space with crocuses, support group chairs, and the unbreakable rhythm of boy and dog footfalls heading toward a future no longer shadowed by vents and whispers. Walter let the sun warm, a face that had weathered too many winters, and for the first time since leaving the jungle decades ago, he felt the season turning in step with his own heart-hawing, flowing, ready to grow. Sunlight spilled across Redwood Hollow's town square like liquid brass, warming the freshly scrubbed bandstand that sat beneath the budding limbs of an ancient oak. Folding chairs fanned out in neat rows, their metal legs wobbling on flagstones still damp from last night's rain, and hand-painted banners fluttered overhead, "Thank you, Baron," letters tilting where children's brushes had trembled with excitement. The air smelled of lilac and donut glaze from May's bakery table. The hum of townsfolk gathering felt gentler than any applause Walter could remember from his formal military days. Baron waited behind the stage, black and tan coat gleaming in the morning light. The shaved patch on his side had regrown enough fur to mask the surgery scar. Only Walter's watchful eye traced its outline. The shepherd sat tall, wide paws planted, but his ears swiveled each time a rescued child squealed or a camera shutter clicked. He wore his old K9 harness, now fitted with a navy blue sash borrowed from the county honor guard. On his collar hung a simple brass disc stamped Service and Velour Sheriff Nolan's doing yet. Walter suspected the dog had little notion today was meant for him. Theo darted up the wooden steps, clutching a lumpy bundle wrapped in tissue paper. His Sunday shirt was buttoned crooked. Excitement outran neatness. "It's starting," he whispered, cheeks flushed pink. Baron nuzzled the boy's waist, sniffed the crayon wax scent wafting from that bundle, and thumped his tail once against the planks. Sheriff Nolan stepped to the podium, tapping mic glass. The crowd settled. Birds kept singing. "Neighbors and friends," he began, voice steady. 2 months ago, our town faced a darkness that threatened its very heart, our children. Today, we stand in the light because courage met that darkness head-on. He gestured toward the front row, where Emily Carver sat between her parents, tiny fingers twisting a blue ribbon now threaded through her hair. Next to her, Owen Wilkes waved shyly. Other children rescued from the warehouse clutched stuffed animals or new notebooks donated by townsfolk, their faces carrying the delicate glow of kids relearning safety. And at that hour, Nolan continued, courage had 4 paws, a fierce bark, and a will stronger than fear. Baron did what we humans sometimes hesitate to do. He acted. Murmurs of agreement rippled. A few clapped already. Nolan lifted a small velvet box. "On behalf of the county, we award Baron the Star of Civil Valor, the first non-human recipient in our history." A cheer rose. Walter felt it in his ribs. He guided Baron forward. The dog trotted to the stage edge, ears flattening briefly at the surge of applause, then settled beside Walt's leg. Nolan knelt dress blues creasing and pinned the tiny star to the dog's harness chest strap. Cameras flashed. Baron sneezed at the pop of one bulb, drawing affectionate laughter. Walter caught Theo's eye, nodded. The boy inhaled and marched to the microphone sword enough that Nolan angled it downward. Theo cleared his throat. The square quieted. "I know Baron already got a shiny medal," he said, voice trembling yet clear. "But I made him one too." He unwound the tissue paper, revealing a circle cut from cereal box cardboard, colored sky blue and rimmed in shaky gold. Across the middle, thick red letters spelled Hero. Each stroke pressed so hard the wax glistened. Gasps and soft awes floated from the crowd. Theo knelt before Baron, looped a yarn string over the dog's head. The cardboard disc rested against the brass star, humble and proud all at once. Baron sniffed it, then licked the boy's cheek, tail sweeping in slow, grateful arcs. Theo's grin ignited every grown heart watching. Emily stood abruptly, clutching a bouquet of dandelions she'd picked from beside the courthouse walk, half of them missing heads from nervous handling. She hurried forward. Her parents relaxed their gentle grasp and let her go. At Theo's side, she offered the stems to Baron, giggling when he lowered his muzzle, breathing in the summer grass scent. Other rescued children followed Owen, handing over a juice box sticker he'd peeled carefully. Lily from next street gifting a braided friendship bracelet made of yarn. Soon the shepherd's chest strap bristled with trinkets, tiny hearts, pressed pennies, a paper star scrawled "Safe Dog." Walter blinked moisture from his eyes. The world blurred anyway. He had worn medals cold against dress uniform, weighty with memory. None felt like these bright tokens fluttering on Berenique, a heartbeat of gratitude, each proof that nightmares could be rewritten by small hands. Nolan waited until the children stepped back, then said, "Let's give our heroes, Baron, Theo, and Walterone more thank you." Applause bloomed, louder than before, rich with relief and pride. Walter stooped, whispered into the shepherd's ear, "Take your bow, buddy," and gently guided a paw up. Baron sat upright, lifted his foreleg just as he'd been trained long ago. The crowd erupted anew, laughter like chimes, and for a moment Redwood Hollow felt invincible. After formalities, the bandstand turned picnic. May handed out cinnamon twists. Pastor Malloy poured lemonade. Walter eased onto a bench beneath the oak, Baron at his feet, Theo leaning against his shoulder. Children circled, stroking the dog's ears, telling him secrets. New bicycles, birthday wishes, dreams of going camping where no bad men could find them. Baron soaked it in, tongue lolling, brown eyes, soft with the understanding only dogs possess that presence itself can mend fractures the mind can't name. Sheriff Nolan joined Walter, 2 paper cups in hand. "Apple cider," he said, passing one over. "Celebratory, but church approved." Walter chuckled, sipping. He watched Theo chase Emily around a chalk hopscotch grid, Baron trotting sentinel, cardboard metal bouncing. Sunlight caught the brass star, throwing sparks across pavement. Kids squealed delight. "We did some good," Nolan murmured. "Baron did," Walter corrected. But the sheriff shook his head. "Took a man who wouldn't give up." He clinked his cup gently against Walter's. "Glad you stuck around, Walt." Walter let the praise settle without rebuttal. The support group had taught him to accept grace when offered. He looked over the square parents, chatting, deputies smiling, life unfurling. Healing was not a single note, but a melody. Today marked a chorus. Theo returned breathless, plopped on the bench. "Grandpa, Baron wants ice cream." The dog's perked ears confirmed. Walter laughed from his belly, an unguarded sound that surprised even him. "Then Baron shall have ice cream. Hero's orders. They walked to the dairy cart. Boy skipping, dog trotting, man strolling beneath an April sky. As the vendor scooped vanilla into a pup cup, Walter thought of the winter night when darkness seeped through vents. He glanced at Theo, tugging gently on Baron's sash so trinkets chimed like medals of old campaigns, and he realized darkness no longer held their story. It was here, in sunlight and children's laughter, within a single wag of a tail that said the fight was worth it. Walter paid, handed Baron his treat. The shepherd licked appreciative swirls, then nudged a cold nose against Walter's hand. "Thank you, Commander. Mission continues." Walter scratched under his collar and whispered, "At ease, hero." Baron's tail swept the spring-dusted ground, echoing the steady heartbeat of a town learning to trust mornings again. Moonlight poured across the cabin's wooden floor like a pale river, edging around furniture, cooling the laughter and applause that still lingered in the walls from the day's celebration. The house smelled faintly of lilac, cinnamon donuts, and the sugary vanilla swirls that had clung to Baron's whiskers after his hero's ice cream cup. Outside, frogs croaked from the Creek of Spring chorus. Walter hadn't heard in years, either because he'd been away at war, or because, until recently, his ears had tuned only to threats. Theo padded down the hallway in socked feet, his new favorite library book clutched to his chest. The Bravest Dog, signed by every child rescued from the warehouse. Exhaustion tugged at his eyelids, but a contented warmth buoyed him. He passed Baron, who lay right outside the boy's bedroom as he had for months, but tonight there was no tension in the shepherd's muscles, no vigilant twitch of ears at every creak groan. Baron's body sprawled in a loose, comfortable sprawl. One paw flopped sideways, chest rising in deep, even waves. Theo crouched, kissed the soft fur between those legendary ears, and whispered, "Night, partner." Baron blinked once sparely lifting. Lidson exhaled a gentle chuff, as if replying, "All clear." "Kids." The cardboard hero medal still hung taped above the doorframe, edges curling. Theo brushed it lightly before slipping into his room. Inside, the closet stood shut, latched with a new lock. Walter had installed industrial steel, overkill for clothes, but perfect for monsters that no longer existed. A faint brass plate punched with Baron's paw print had been screwed to the wood, commemorative and defiant, protected by valor. Theo stared at it, a smile softening his face. He clicked on his bedside lamp, streamed light over comic strip posters, mismatched socks, and the vent now covered by a welded plate of stainless steel, 4 anchor bolts gleaming like stars. Baron had sniffed it earlier, deemed it sufficient, and never looked back. Theo opened the window a crack. Spring night air drifted in, carrying pine and damp soil. He crawled under quilts, book in hand, but sleep tugged faster than storyline. His lips shaped silent words of thanks to Baron, to Grandpa, to the universe for turning horror into hope. Lamp off, he sank into dreams unmarred by whispers. Out in the hallway, Walter knelt beside Baron. The dog's eyes fluttered open, acknowledging command presence, then softened when Walter scratched under his collar. "Mission accomplished," Walter murmured. "No nightmares on patrol." Baron's tail thumped once, then he resettled, chin on paws. Walter stood, stretching joints that ached less these days, thanks to weekly group sessions and long walks with boy and dog. He glanced toward the living room where his old service rifle now rested behind a locked display case, stripped of firing Pino relic rather than an anchor to the past. On the mantel, next to family photos, the county star of civil valor gleamed. But front and center sat the crayon medal, hero letters smudged by dog slobber, Walter's favorite testament that some honors were too pure for polish. He dimmed hallway lights until only moonglow remained, spilling through windows in liquid stripes. It reached the closet door, rolling silver over the protective plate, then drifted down to caress Baron's brindled fur. The dog's body twitched with dreams maybe of snowy battlefields or warm summer trails. Walter hoped for the latter. With a final gentle pat, the veteran retreated to his room, leaving door ajar, a habit of vigilance rewritten as gesture of trust. Minutes passed. A floorboard settled. The refrigerator hummed. Baron did not stir. His breathing matched the creak's distant hush, matched Theo's restful sighs. Outside, the wind carried a barred owl's hoot. Inside, peace answered with silence. Baron's ears flicked once, acknowledging the night the same way sailors mark constellations out of instinct. Not fearing found nothing amiss. Muscles slackened. Dreams reclaimed him. Perhaps he chased sticks across sunlit meadows or trotted beside Theo on the first day of summer break. Whatever the vision, his tail gave a slow, contented sweep, patting hardwood in a heartbeat's rhythm. Moonlight continued its gentle crawl, sliding past knots in timber, pooling at the dog's paws and catching in the crystal knob of the closet door. Once that door had guarded a hidden camera, a conduit of dread. Now it guarded only clothes and childhood secrets. Its lock shimmered, impenetrable. No footfalls in vents, no mechanical whir. Only a house breathing easy. In the master bedroom, Walter lay atop covers, window open to spring air. He listened not for intruders, but for life's quieter sounds. Creek burble, owl hoot, faint dog snores. His heart, once attuned to tripwires and ambush rustles, synced with that peaceful trio. He closed his eyes and thought of tomorrow. Theo's baseball tryouts, Baron's follow-up vet visit, his own turn to share a memory at group this time, something good. A cloud drifted across the moon, shadows deepened. Baron shifted, adjusting for comfort, and quiet resumed. When the cloud passed, a final beam slanted through the hallway window and crowned the shepherd's head in silver, like an anointing only night could give. The light crossed Theo's threshold, but did not wake him. Instead, it laid a luminous band across the closet, door closed, locked, and no longer hiding monsters. Outside, countertops cooled, blooms curled, and Redwood Hollow slept in unison with its newly knighted watchdog. The world would spin again into uncertainty storms, exams, memories that sometimes still growled, but tonight every gear clicked into gentle alignment. Boy, dog, and soldier, each breathed a steady beat, guarded by the simplest of truths. Darkness can be fought back, monsters can be unmasked, and a single wag of a tail can carry a town from winter into spring. Baron's eyelids fluttered one final time. He seemed to smile in his sleep. The moonlight stayed a while longer, standing sentry and then, satisfied, it moved on, leaving the cabin steeped in quiet worth more than medals. The hush of safety hard-won and, at last, utterly believed. After everything we've witnessed, winter fears melting into spring light, it's hard not to feel humbled by what a good dog can teach us. A German Shepherd's loyalty isn't just instinct. It's a quiet promise that says, "I'm here, no matter how dark the night gets." Loving an animal like Baron reminds us that courage can have soft fur and a wagging tail, and that the safest place for a child's heart is often beneath a watchful paw. If you'd like to deepen the bond with your own four-legged friend, you might enjoy the free training tips and enrichment ideas the American Kennel Club shares on their site. I've found them comforting, almost like having a gentle coach walking beside me and my dog. One step at a time. Take a look whenever you feel ready. And tonight, as you hear your shepherd, or spaniel, or sweet old mutt settling near the bedroom door, remember, their love is a gift we get to unwrap every single day. Treasure it, nurture it, and let it guide you toward kinder mornings.